One of those days, one of those weeks. Hello everyone, I hope all of you are doing well. Welcome to the Friday evening fuck about stream. Effectively office hours this week, although we didn't have an AO reading, so it'll be a little bit different because I'm basically going to be going over parts of AO that we could have gone over and refining some of my own grasps of some of these things. But I hope all of you are doing well. It's been a long week. The last 2 weeks I had a new work contract come in, so I've been kind of dying doing that as I've been trying to edit videos, get things out there, get all this stuff in place, keep this going. One of the things I'm excited about, and I should have some actually, because we're hitting 5 years for the QC in the next week, and I've always wanted a QC mug and shirt. I don't give a fuck. Like I like the look and feel. I mean, I made the art, so of course I do. So I made some fucking merch. See if it turned out not shitty when it shows up at some point. We'll find out. Who knows? Okay, Larry, can I help you with WordPress? Possibly. Possibly. Why don't you let me know what you need and we'll talk through it. It might be easier in the Discord for that one, but you never quite know. Never quite. I don't have a ton of major theory things to cover. I'm not going to be going over PhilosophyTube's second video or anything. If you missed it, in case you missed it, during the 7-hour nightmare stream, which is slowly making its way up, and 2 videos from this already have, I covered both of her videos. First was Nietzsche woke, and then also was Nietzsche MAGA, which is the second video, which was only on Nebula, and I still did it, still put it out there. Good Lord. You can hit me up on Discord, sure. Yeah, join the Discord, we'll see. I'm not sure how I'd be able to help you with Discord or WordPress. In fact, I probably shouldn't be helping you with WordPress. Go to Google, go to other places. I'm not a web guy anymore. That's not my jam. But I appreciate you asking. I appreciate you asking. Who knows? We'll see. But apparently she has a third video in tow. I probably won't be reacting to it. It's going to be, unless it's like shockingly bad in a different way. What a lot of people don't know is the second video isn't like dramatically more interesting than the first. The way she set these up is it's the same thing. There's even a middle point of both videos where about 2 minutes is identical. She uses the same quotes from Wendy Brown. God, who was it? Can't remember exactly. She uses the same quotes. And so it's a horrifying like miscarriage of laziness in every single way. Not only does she completely make up and bullshit about sources, has no interest in the actual meaning behind the text, has no interest in anything that happens, speaks incredibly silly across the board, but also just lazy in every single way. Very frustrating. So unless the new one is like shockingly interesting in some way, or there's some hilariously new bad way, it's bad. it's just going to be more of the same shit, I have a feeling. And for that, I have less of an interest. Less of an interest, to say the least. You can watch it with me laughing along. I ended up doing another video on, someone had me watch another one of her videos, and who knows, I might do another at some point if I hate myself enough. But it actually led into a good solid 35 to 40 minute rant about the nature of extended universes and modern intellectual property through the lens of capital, and materialist sort of history of how Star Wars got to be the way it is and why it's broken. Which I'm actually really happy about how that just sort of rant turned out. So that's been re-uploaded. That went up today. It's pretty actually good. I was actually pretty, I'm okay with it. But with that, I want to make sure that we're at least moving forward in like some interesting places, to say the least, because there's a lot here. And I want to make sure we're moving forward in the right ways. All that you said, she's also somehow incredibly condescending. There is no end to the confidence that people who are wrong have. And it's really frustrating because in order to be able to have conversations with people, you have to actually have that level of confidence. They presume it. People presume it. If I were to, like, you were to see me in Philosophy Tube talk, if I were to just be like how I am in the QC, where it's like, well, that's interesting. Why would you say that? The domineering personality will win because confidence is what wins. Debates, again, and performances like that aren't really for education or edification of thought or to discuss. A debate is for emotionally swaying opinion at best, mostly just to make everyone who's a fan of yours sort of, orgasm in their own way. And unless you have that confidence in response, you get steamrolled. It's one of the natures of the beast. Yuda says, hey Brooks, the rant about Star Wars made me remember a VOD about early Christianity and Star Wars made by religion for breakfast. Ooh, that might be interesting. It might be interesting. We're talking about a recent video. I already did. That's what I was going over. I was like, we're not going to be reacting to a new video because I've done that. Most people weren't here for the stream, but it's also being put up on YouTube right now. I'm just tossing up the little bits where I react to part 2, and apparently there's going to be a part 3 on Nebula. Again, unless it's interestingly bad, I have a lot of lack of interest. The one thing about Star Wars I do find interesting, for those who've been following for a while or who know me in real life, know that I fucking hate talking about Star Wars. Very few things I hate talking about more. Because most discussions I consider to be really vapid and empty. Like, I don't want to spend time talking about any of it, to be perfectly frank. I have things I like, I have videos I like, I have movies I like, I have games I like, all that stuff. Sure, it's fun. It ain't my jam. But Star Wars has a very particular cultural impact that is fascinating. I got a chance to travel in my early mid-20s to China and around the world. And the one consistent thing when I was able to go to like rural areas, like far outside, I was always stunned with how many people knew Darth Vader or had Darth Vader memorabilia or Star Wars memorabilia. It was always amazing to me. Still is. But that cultural impact, I think, is worth, looking through and thinking through. But the vast majority of Star Wars stuff is kind of, tapped. And then we run into, and to bring it back to Anti-Oedipus, we run into the big problem with the way that we handle myth, or the way that we talk about myth and fantasy and legends and symbols. Because it's the core critique of Anti-Oedipus. It's the reason that they are anti-Oedipus. When we talk about the symbolic language of things, and let's make it very simple. The word mom. Mom is a position that people hold. It's a thing. But it's not a person. It's not a unique thing. It's a symbol. It's an empty position. Someone can be a mom. You will see people making the joke about a dad being mom. There's a movie I grew up with called Mr. Mom, because mom is a position. It's a symbol. It's a thing that moves around between different elements, right? That symbol can be filled with a lot of stuff. When we live in that space of that, where symbols are what we fill with other things, where we take the hero's journey. For example, for Luke, we go, that's the good guy being a symbol. That's the hero, that's the villain, that's these symbolic archetypes. There's a lot of ways to regard them, but for the most part, what we do is we collapse them and pretend that they are a thing when they're really a symbol. And that symbolic move, that thing that we do as we start seeing the world as relationships between moms and dads, mothers and sons, fathers and sons, when we see all of these things as analogous or as similar or as metaphorical for other things, what starts to happen is we reduce the actual beauty of the world by a billionfold. It's hard to describe at how much. And this is the core thing when we talk about rediscovering non-human sex, as they talk about in Anti-Oedipus. They don't mean inhuman. They mean things that exist outside of that symbolic human thing, the attractions we feel, the drives, the stuff that isn't symbolically led, that isn't driving us towards wanting to be good or bad. That's tends to be the case. People are Star Wars is fascinating this way. People are really attracted to really Darth Vader. Or if they're good guys, they like Obi-Wan or Yoda, but they're seen as hokey. Like there's a lot of, but there's not like anything beyond the symbols. It's one of the reasons Star Wars is kind of fucked. Is it's a kid's project ultimately. The complex multiplicity that actually exists inside of the real world can't be brought to a space that's symbolic or mythological. Instead, what you do is you take the ideas of the myths, the connections, the symbolic connections, and you take those relationships and you squeeze the rest of the world into them. Oh, that's the dark side. That's the light side. That's it. Done. Nice and simple. This space, this way of thinking, deeply, and Nietzsche would say deeply Christian, deeply spiritual, deeply filled with resentment, deeply filled with basically people telling us what words mean and a king telling us what words mean and giving us that symbolic disconnection, however you want to get there. That thing that we can't get to anymore because we have symbols, this is difference. This is the libido, desire, the drives of things. And that's where the power of shit comes in. This is when you start realizing that the actual way that the world operates, the actual way we play together is always new, that there is no such thing as the same me identically every single day. One of the examples I love using is when we see a tree. That tree that I see, and I look at it, I go, oh, there's a tree. I turn around and I look back again. Is it the same tree? No, it's not. Like one, how do you define tree? Where's the edges? Is it the same in time? Is it the same because I'm looking at it differently? What I've seen before, I'm not looking at the same way. Maybe my eye is catching a different area of it because the other parts aren't as interesting. Maybe I'm noticing things that are in different, whatever it is, that tree is actually not the same tree. In fact, all those trees are not the same tree. In fact, I'm not the same and the site is not the same. The consistency with which we're able to experience these things is a thread that we get to put through all of it. And that thread we can use and have as part of our sort of ability to find ourselves, find the world, or that thread can be used to sew up and create these symbols and place us in a space where we are more or less at the whim of those in power. It's a ship of Theseus a little bit, but the ship of Theseus presumes that the ship is the same ship every moment. It's not. This is a logic of sense is really about this at its base, but Anti-Oedipus, I think, teases it out very, very, very far. The nature of organization, and they hyphenate that when they talk about this stuff, the nature of organization, the nature of the symbolic, all of these things, this is pulling at a plane of structure, a plane of consistency that is sort of helping us build the world as we see it. And we get caught up by that fantasy, that phantasm of consistency where we believe it's real. So this is what we're going to focus on today, right here. See this stuff? This is going to be, I'm going to switch over to the other reading method because I think that'll probably be, one, I think it's prettier, to be perfectly frank. But I think this text is going to end up being too small if I don't set it up right. So one moment. That in place. All right. So this is 309. Finish that line. Go over. Go 4. Let's go boop, 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 boop. 100 green, and here we go. My volume's lower? My volume came lower? Wait, it did. My volume is low? My volume is high. What the fuck? Okay, I hate all of this so much. Okay, 1 second. And glitches out. Okay. All right. I'm going to get rid of this thing. This is fascinating. This pisses me off. This is fascinating. Huh. Okay. Is that better? And it's got the subtitles. I didn't change anything. I deleted it and re-added it. Whatever. Simone Pierre Dubé, if you would tell me that this seems better, this is a lot better. I am in your debt and confused. We'll deal with it. We'll keep moving. Fucking. I need to the problem is that I sit and I can't have a stream where I just go, okay, is that good? Because if there's delay, it's shitty. Plus, no one wants that. No one wants to just join Brooks as he fucking does that. It's glitchy now though. Mother. All right, we're going to see if it is still glitchy. Let's see. It is still glitched. What the fuck? Okay, why would it be doing that is my question. That would be my question. What fucking happened that made that happen as a thing? I have closed you up. I have other things. I have nothing open that should be using this that's taking in memory. Let's close that. I am fascinated by how all of this stuff works. It's just a pain in the ass. I have issues no one's ever seen before. I live in a place of edge case. Because I have enough knowledge to be able to fuck with the thing I've got. You can just read it. I'll mute this myself. And it keeps going to static every few seconds, and I don't know why. Let me restart the audio. 1 sec. Do 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 do. Dwee doo 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 doo. It's all my audio has been fully restarted. Seems to be working. We'll go with this. Someone can scream at me if it's not working. Sorry, Big Aaron. I know it's frustrating. Trust me. Yeah, that's the way it works. If anyone wants to, after this, I'm probably just going to sit in the Discord and fuck with my audio settings a while. We'll see if we can get this running or whatever. I don't know. All right. So, as I was saying, I want to talk through the way that things seem to actually exist. And again, what it means to actually exist, how it operates, how things operate, and how we build them. The sound's less clear. The glitch isn't there. I don't even know what to do about that at this point. I'm just going to assume that everything's terrible and that I'm fucked. And that's the way it's going to go. I hope that's fine for everyone. The fuck? It's using loopback. Why is it not pulling anything? That should be fine. Whatever. Theory. We're going to read this and go through this because this is the stuff of AO that we're going to be spending time on this next Tuesday. Much closer reading. But instead of doing like a close reading, I'm just going to bounce around this section and we're going to talk about these things. Where they're opening. And this is kind of the previous paragraph is kind of super important here. They have moved on from Freud to begin building out from a critique of Klein, first Freud, then Klein, and then Lacan. And the way that they want to make this move is they want to talk through Lacan's move into this space of the wheel of the imaginary and the symbolic, like an analytic squirrel. Close. It's like a gerbil on a fucking wheel, a rat on a wheel. He doesn't want to be caught up, Lacan, in Oedipal imagery and Oedipalizing structure, this imaginary identity of persons and structural unit of machines, everywhere knocking against impasses, blah, 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 blah. The way that they're talking about it, they're talking about the move Lacan made into a different way that the symbolic would work, which is actually, for them, the way that despotic overcoding operates, the way that writing and the voice and the way that these things sort of are merged come together. This is what they say is Lacan's insight. The challenge for this is that that structure does have a reverse side that is like the real production of desire. This is this last little bit just to read. To trace back from images to the structure, which is what Lacan is kind of doing, would have little significance, would not rescue us from representation if the structure did not have a reverse side that is like the real production of desire. The reverse side is this real inorganization of the molecular elements, the chaos, the chaosophy, the totality of, I wouldn't say the unknown, but just the chaos of all. For Deleuze and Guattari in this, the way that they're coming at it is not to say we don't have the ability to understand chaos. That's not what they're doing. Instead, all is chaos, and from the chaos, there's these odd emergent elements that come together, that work together to build sense, to make sense, to build everything together. So when we talk about the chaos, the molecular elements, the machinic nature of things, the tiniest little bits and bobs hitting each other, this is what they're referring to, partial objects that enter into indirect syntheses or interactions. This is the three syntheses of the desire. Because they're not partial in the sense of extensive parts, but rather partial, like intensities under which a unit of matter always fills space in varying degree. A lot of people, when they come to this, they go, oh, partial objects, like, I used to even say this, because it's kind of right, but also kind of wrong. When I say my finger is a partial object, it's a part of Brooks, partial object. No, because it can be named. It's a thing. It's an extensive part of Brooks. That's not what partial means in this case. That's the French words here are like super, super important. Let me get really particular here. Sorry, 2 seconds. Partial. I know, sorry, French people, you hate me every time I try to do that. The nature of partial is, how to put it? Partial is kind of like the intensity of bias, you might say. The partial, being partial to something, the way you would say, I'm partial to X. I'm playing in that direction. Whereas the other is more of an extensive part of something, something not partial. Someone feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that sort of difference. That's kind of how I understood it. That's what's in my notes. But it's that thing, the way they describe it. It's not partial in the sense of extensive parts. Oh, the finger is a part of Brooks. But rather partial, like an intensity under which a unit of matter always fills space in varying degree. The temperature of a thing, the feeling of a thing, the way that we always, it's a haute crime. Yeah, that's how I'll pronounce it too. The eye, the mouth, the anus as degrees of matter. When we say the mouth, we don't actually mean literally the specific matter that is literally the mouth, because there's not really an edge to this. It's not really how it operates. There's no edge to the mouth where you're like, oh, that's no more mouth, because you'd either include something or not include something. It's kind of like there's no fine line. Instead, the partial objects are the intensities of things. So when we say the mouth, the eye, the anus, the elements, the partial objects, we're talking about all the parts of things that have that edge of intensity to it. Because, again, at the base level, the mechanistic side of things that's happening, these objects, these bodies are colliding and hitting each other, and there's machinic connections and all this fun shit that's happening. The parts of things here, the molecular elements, aren't named. These are bodies. These aren't events. These aren't things. These aren't ideas. They're just all of the stuff, and it's all the stuff of stuff. And so there's like really no bottom to that, not as a thing. Here we have this space where it's pure positive multiplicities, where everything is possible. There's no such thing as possible or impossible here. Everything is possible. Without exclusiveness, without negation. Syntheses operating without plan, where connections are transverse, disjunctions included. Conjunctions polyvocal, indifferent to their underlying support, since this matter that serves them precisely as a support receives no specificity from any structural or personal unity, but appears as a body without organs that fills the space each time intensity fills it. This is the introduction of that line of the thing. This is where the BWO comes. To say it again and slower. To say it again and slower. These spaces have pure positive multiplicities. Do not think of anything that exists in the molecular as having an edge. Oh, here's where there's no stuff. Nope, there's stuff. There's always stuff. There's not no stuff. It's just stuff we don't consider stuff. Right? So if it's not that the canyon is an empty space. It's the canyon is a positive space. Okay? Because it is. Canyon is a thing. You don't go, oh, the river and high walls. No, the canyon itself is a thing. The groove is a thing. The empty space is still a thing. It's a pure positive everything. Everything's purely positive as a multiplicity. All the bits, all the bobs, unnamed without any of that, because everything here is possible. There's no exclusiveness. There's no edges. There's no negation. It's not this. It's not, no, none of that. All of these things are running. And the syntheses, these passive syntheses, as things collide, these mechanistic processes, they operate without plan. Stuff collides, stuff comes together, stuff goes through the process of connection, disconnection, conjunction. All of this is always happening. Everything is always doing this. All the fucking time. Connections are happening, being made, and moving on to the next step. But it's a multitude of them, a multiplicity of them everywhere. This is pre-personal. This is how the stuff of stuff exists ontologically for Deleuze. It is the chaos. Here, the connections are transverse. They're not sectioned off. Here, the disjunctions are even included. Disjunctions, the disconnections, the recordings. Conjunctions themselves are polyvocal. There's no negation that exists here. There's no edging on lacooning. There's no no. That's the thing to remember. There's no no here. Because all of this stuff, this matter that serves these processes, serves them precisely as a support, and it has no specificity from any structural or personal unity at all. There's none. But it appears as a body without organs that fills the space each time an intensity fills it. There is not a line around your body. There is not a line around the body without organs. This is not what they're talking about. They're talking about the surface on which it just seems, and there's an oddness, this appearance, this, they even refer to it as almost miraculous thing that happens, that as intensity fills it, the body without organs seems to be there, to appear, to come about, to exist. There's a continuity that seems to be seen as this pulsating mass does its thing, as the fluxion happens. As intensity fills this space, the body without organs appears. It appears to fill that space as intensity fills it. This is done with signs of desire that compose a signifying chain, but are not themselves signifying. They don't answer the rules of a linguistic game of chess, but instead to the lottery drawings that sometimes cause a word to be chosen, sometimes a design, sometimes a thing, a piece of a thing, depending on one another only by the order of the random drawings and holdings together, only by the absence of a link. For Lacan, the words that are used, the symbolic play that's happening and is continually ongoing, this process that he's got, as it sort of happens. You're picking words based on this chain of meaning, this signifying chain based on a master signifier. They would argue, no, there's a chain here, certainly, but it is not a chain of significations because these elements don't signify. The chains are not signifying. The chains themselves are chains, though. What they do is not necessarily play this linguistic game of chess of, oh, it's this, maybe that, and parlaying and preparing and all that. Instead, it's a lottery drawing. I love this idea. It's pulling up what it can to make sense of the thing. It is finding that random something that they use the phrase. God, it's in Logic of Sense. Deleuze uses it. They use it here. A liquid, the something that shows up. This sort of randomness of things, the swerve that causes a word to be chosen. Sometimes a design, a structure, a thing or a piece of a thing, depending on one another only by the order of random drawings. All of these things are random. The chaos is there. It's producing constantly. We've found a consistency over the course of years. We don't start with that. Consistency isn't from moment one of birth or even existence or even, conceiving of our own consciousness. That's not when it starts. We are looking at things from the position we're in, back and forward, from our consciousness, from how we exist, from how we want to see ourselves. And it's not just played by that, but it's grown from there. It's played from there as a thing. And that's the line they have here. Depending on one another only by the random drawings, holdings together only by the absence of a link, a non-localizable connection, having no other statutory condition than that of being dispersed elements of desiring machines that are themselves dispersed. This is the line. It is this entire reverse side of the structure Lacan discovers. This is what they love. It is the O of the machine, the big O, other is non-human sex, schizophrenizing the analytic field instead of Oedipalizing the psychotic field. It's a psychoanalytic term. They're turning Lacan's discovery into, and this is basically Guattari's work and all of his stuff. They're taking Lacan and going, this other side where you find these elements is actually the chaosophy. It's actually the bodies. It's actually where the random and the growth and all of this stuff sort of happens organically without aim. There's nothing larger. This is the molecular. The molar on the other side of things, the symbolic that is ordering, that is demanding. There's an interaction here that creates this. There's an interaction that plays with this. And this is what they come to say. Everything hinges on the way at the bottom here, in which the structure is elicited from the machines according to planes of consistency or of structuration and of lines of selection that correspond to large statistical aggregates or molar formations and that determine the links and reduce production to representation. That is where the disjunctions become exclusive, connections global, conjunctions biunivocal. This is the way symbols and representations fuck us. And fuck you. And it happens to all of us. It's the highest possible caliber in stoner talk. This is next level stoner talk. This is stuff that doesn't work for stoners because it would make them, it breaks their brains. The thing that's happening is the machines at the base, the desiring machines, are producing constantly, and there's this big swarming path of billions of them always producing intensities, and there's this odd sort of stuff that we see sort of appear, the body without organs, as they say, the surface on which recordings seem to happen, that seems to be this place where something more is going on, where consistency can be found. And when we have that, when we have these lines of selection, when we have these things that correspond to large statistical aggregates. Oh, at large, these things seem to do this. Or molar formations. Oh, the tree seems to do this. That determine links, reduce production to representation. Oh yeah, well that's because that's a tree. That's why it does that. It does that because it's a tree. Well, what's a tree? It's a fucking stump thing and whatever. The symbol is created. When we do that, the disjunctions, the disconnection, the way things are recorded, become exclusive rather than sort of inferential and inclusive. Instead of saying it's either a tree or a bush, it can be both. I can name others that do that. Like I can name things that it's both, because it's not really about the utter truth of whether or not it's a tree or a bush. These are ways we describe things, and I'm describing the thing I'm seeing, but I'm having to do it with the symbol, the representation, and find out if it's a true tree or a true bush, the Platonic ideal of the thing. Suddenly the disjunction is exclusive. It's either or, not either or. And the connections become global. The symbol of the tree is what I'm striving for, and I'm trying to connect to that rather than allowing things to connect as they sort of do emergently. The conjunctions become biunivocal instead of having a polyvocal response where I'm talking about the thing I'm seeing in mass. I crush it because I say, yes, it's a lovely tree. That's it. That's the end of the thing. I don't get to say more. I don't get to say more at all. That thing that happens, that support itself gains specificity under a structural unity, think of the tree, and the signs themselves become signifying under action of the despotic symbol that totalizes them in the name of its own absence or withdrawal. It's not a tree. A tree is a symbol. That's not the tree. That's not how it works. There's no such thing. But the totalized thing, the despotic symbol, is removed necessarily. It's gone. Yes, in fact, the production of desire can be represented only in terms of an extrapolated sign that joins together all the elements of production in a constellation of which it is not itself a part. The word tree, the symbol tree, is not a part of treeing. It has nothing to do with treeing in any capacity. That tree is treeing. That's not what it's doing. It's not part of that. An absence of tie necessarily appears as an absence, not as a term of positive force. Now it's a lack, not a positive force. There, desire is necessarily referring to a missing term. I like tree. I like that tree, but I like trees. Is it that? It's not that. Is it? It's not the thing. It's not the lived thing. It's something slightly off, just off center. Zizek writes about this a lot, Lacan as well. Their desire is referred to this missing term. The signs of desire, now being non-signifying, become signifying in representation only in terms of a signifier of absence or lack. The only way that you have this happen is when you accept that tree means tree, whatever the fuck that means, or woman means woman, or man means man. It has nothing to do with the lived experience of the thing, or the actual experience of the thing, or the way you're experiencing the thing right now. It's trying to get back to the transcendent truth of what that thing is. What is this thing? It is a tree. You are a man. You are an American. You're white. You're any of these things. All of this stuff necessarily becomes that missing term that doesn't actually connect with anything, is only built through this absence or lack. And the structure that exists is formed and appears only in terms of the symbolic term defined as lack. The great other, as the non-human sex, gives way in representation to a signifier of the great other as an always missing term, the all-too-human sex, the phallus of molar castration. This is castration in Lacan. This is his overall play. But this thing that's happening, that Lacan's doing, and where they're running with it, it shows itself, as they say here, in all its complexity. For it's certain that he does not enclose the unconscious in an Oedipal structure. He shows, on the contrary, that Oedipus is imaginary, nothing but an image, a myth, that this or these images are produced by an Oedipalizing structure, that this structure acts only insofar as it reproduces the element of castration, which itself is not imaginary, but symbolic. There we have three planes of structure, which correspond to the aggregates. We have Oedipus as the imaginary reterritorialization of private man. Oedipus is the imaginary reterritorialization, produced under the structural conditions of capitalism, inasmuch as capitalism reduces and revives the archaism of the imperial symbol or the vanished despot, the master signifier on high. All three of these are necessary, precisely in order to lead Oedipus to the point of self-critique. The task undertaken by Lacan is to lead Oedipus to such a point. He goes through Rudinesco. We're going to move and keep moving on. What is this point of self-criticism that Lacan takes Oedipus to? It's the point where the structure, beyond the images that fill it and the symbolic that conditions it within representation, reveals its reverse side as a positive principle of non-consistency that dissolves it, where desire is shifted into the order of production, related to its molecular elements, where it lacks nothing, because it is defined as the natural and sensuous objective being, at the same time as the real is defined as the objective being of desire. This is where their critique of Lacan is coming back. And things are defined as lack, yet it's clear once reading, if one reads the science of logic by Hegel, darkness is different from Cahir. Both are a lack of light, yet the lack of darkness. Thought office hours was supposed to be a community thing. Convenient is still. Are you wanting me to jump into? Is that you? Is that you in there? God damn, I'm on streamer mode. I can't see. It is you. I'll be jumping in a minute. I wanted to go over this because it kind of fit in with an earlier rant, and we'll move into more open office hours. So Estelle, just give it a moment. All of this comes back to, as they're talking through Lacan, is this line right here. And let me see if I can get the... No. Shit. Shit. Come on. Lost the page too. Love it. Sounds approach. All right. For some reason, it's not letting me do the thing I was hoping to do. Where is the command for it? That's okay. I'm supposed to be able to highlight, and I cannot find the command to highlight. Right there in the middle where it says, it is an orphan. We're going to start right around there. It is an orphan, just as it is an anarchist and atheist, the unconscious of schizoanalysis. It's not an orphan in the sense that the father's name is an absence, but in the sense that the unconscious reproduces itself wherever the names of history designate present intensities. This is the sea of proper names, the thing you see in Alice. And no, plastic pills is not tonight. That's not tonight. You got another week until the 5-year anniversary. The unconscious is not figurative, since it sorry, that took my brain down a side. The unconscious is not figurative, since its figural is abstract. The figure skis. It's not structural, nor is it symbolic. For its reality is that of the real in its very production, in its very in-organization. It's not representative, solely machinic and productive. When we talk about the way that desire drives and things come about, it is always productive. It is eternally productive. When we have representation play into it, when we have symbolic elements that we're driving ourselves to, that we're pushing desire towards, that we're trapping ourselves inside of, that thing that's happening is desire interacting with desire in large scale. It is the molecular desire interacting with the large scale molar desire. And these things and how they interact, this setup puts us in a place of the trap that is representation. And this is the self-criticism of they're talking about. The point where the structure, beyond the images that fill it, and the subject and the symbolic that conditions it within representation, reveals a reverse side as a positive principle of non-consistency that dissolves it. This is what you see in Oedipus taking their journey. This is where they're going to make their move to pulling together out of Lacan all of these other elements and the machinic nature of things. This is where Guattari takes all of his stuff. This is the critique of the symbolic. And this is why when I talk about and I bitch at length about the nature of how people handle myth, or the symbolic way we use language or metaphor or metonymy, these things I'll rail against, and you'll hear me do so. That's the drive, and that's the push. This is the critique. So with that, I'm going to dive into the Discord. Fair enough, Estelle. Give me 2 seconds to make sure that I'm pulling in the audio in the right way. How are you doing, Estelle? Oh, I can't hear you because you're not talking. Now you're unmuted, but there's no sound. That's fine.
There's just a stream latency, and I'm not hearing your voice on Discord.
Oh, weird. That's annoying. That's annoying. There we go. You should be able to hear me now on Discord. How you doing, Estelle?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
Good. I'm doing all right. We're starting up the open house now. I wanted to get that out of the way because it's been a thing that's been bothering me all day, and then just happened to be a rant that just right into the fucking bullseye. So I was like, fuck it. We're doing this right now. So there we go.
Yeah. I was just sick earlier this week, and not being sick anymore makes you appreciate life more.
That is, as Nietzsche would say, I understand my health through my sickness and my sickness through my health. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Speaking of Nietzsche, there's this passage that has been mentioned first in Philosophy Tube, and then it's by everyone who responded to him. To her, sorry. I was... Wait. Anyway.
It doesn't matter. It's fine. I have no doubt you have no desire to misgender anyone. It's fine.
Yeah, because I switched from thinking of the people
you want to get in deep shit. The last time I was shitting on Philosophy Tube before I was doing it on stream, I was watching one of her videos pre-transition, and I could not stop myself from talking about the person on screen in the gender they are on screen, and I just it was like my brain couldn't do it, and I get it.
But it's not even about that.
Well, I mean, it is for me. It was tough.
Because in that sentence, I was no longer thinking about Philosophy Tube. but about the subject I was about to say, which is Sunday and you, and then so
What did Sunday? What's going on with Sunday? I know he's streaming right now. So.
Oh well, right now he's looking over Peterson, I think.
Oh, good lord.
Which like he
Poor Sunday. Peterson.
Well,
Oof.
we had a laugh with rats, you know.
It's a bad theory is a great way to teach people about theory. That's one of the great challenges. Like it's I could sit and we can go through Nietzsche all day. And if I were to read you Nietzsche, I find it beautiful. Like beautiful to read. But it's not good to just go, and here's the words, and then like keep going. It's better to have examples. And a great example is actually to have bad examples. Like, my dad had an old saying, nothing's a total waste, it can always be a bad example, because that's kind of the best way to learn about anything, to be frank. So Philosophy Tube, I think that 7 hours I did and all these videos, which I'm stunned how many people have sat through all of my videos on this. The comments, I think, say, and then people coming into the Quarantine Collective and saying, like, oh, I finally understood this, or this didn't make sense to me before, now it does. The ability to have discussion around bad ideas and to be able to correct them helps enormously. I mean, I genuinely think the plastic pills reaction when I end up doing it next week, and that time, it's going to be long. That's going to be probably the best chance for people to get a first inroad to Anti-Oedipus, because it's an incredibly complex and difficult book, but having something to shit on gives you something to build off of, because as long as it's constructive, that's all that matters, right?
Yeah. Well, I just want. Well, then I just wanted to talk about the passage in it's on Beyond Good and Evil, where where Nietzsche is talking about philosophers, but it seems like he's not talking about. I should bring up the passage itself, which it's from.
Please. It's Beyond Good and Evil. Which number?
Oh, I think I have the page saved.
Not page, the actual. Nietzsche tended to write in aphorisms like 10 or 20 or 200 or whatever.
It's two. It's in part 6.
Part 6? So like 217?
213, 25.
Let's see. Let's pull up on screen. Let's switch to. All right. Let me 2 seconds zoom in so people are able to join us on the journey. Excellent. Okay.
Because there it doesn't seem to be talking about every philosopher or everyone who's called a philosopher.
If 213. This is the Philosophy Tube quote that she completely fucks up. Okay. Here, let me share my screen, make sure we're looking at the same page, and let's take a second and go over it for sure. I like that.
And I've just backtracked all the way. Well, I'll let just to make sure I get more context, and then I just turned to reading the whole part 6, and maybe I should read the whole book even. I haven't done that yet.
I recommend Nietzsche in general. I find his works really interesting and
well, I have
great. And so go ahead, sorry.
I have read the Twilight of the Idols, and it was fantastic.
That's good. And that's like his shitty, like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, that's the one everyone's like, oh, that's from a shitty period. It's like, yeah, kind of. I mean, I really liked it, but it's clear as he goes on, he breaks away from some thoughts and pushes in a different direction. It's pretty fantastic. Let's talk about this section, 213. talking about philosophy, and there's a need to understand when Nietzsche talks about what a philosopher is. One, he's not talking about it in the way that like we are today, where like one is a philosopher because, I mean, Slavoj Žižek is that, like, which is gross. But if we were to say like, hey, you know, what is a philosopher today? It's the people who are paid to tell us. Like Jordan Peterson's a philosopher by capitalist trade. As gross as that is, I mean, it's, people commonly talk about that. For fuck's sake, I know people who I care about who've said Ben Shapiro is the cool kid's philosopher, which makes me want to just vomit in my mouth. But that's a real thing. Like, people talk like that. So when we talk about philosopher today, not really what Nietzsche's talking about. He's talking about people who do philosophy. And he goes at length about what that means and how it's set up and how really the pain of life and how you're socially removed from people. Like, it's an unpleasant existence. Deleuze, by the way, does almost identically the same thing about like, hey, if you're going to be a philosopher, your life's going to be filled with drinking and death and sadness and loneliness. It's like, thanks. It's like really weird way of talking about it. But the thing he's talking about here is, because again, as it's time, and we were having this chat earlier on the QC, it's important to also remember philosophers aren't full-time. Like, that's not what Spinoza was. A philosopher. No, he wasn't. He was a lens maker. We know him as a philosopher now because we consider his treatise to be that good, and it is. But like, these are people who were like teachers at best, but like philosopher wasn't like a job description. So what is a philosopher? What's a thing? And it's hard to know what a philosopher is, as he says, because it cannot be taught. One has to know it from experience, or one should have the pride not to know it. But that the whole world these days talks about things of which they can have no experience applies most and worst to philosophers in philosophical circumstances. This is, by the way, still pretty accurate today. It's the line I like, but that the whole world these days talks about things of which they can have no experience applies most and worst to philosophers in philosophical circumstances. A rare few of them are allowed to know them, and all popular opinions about them are false. So, for instance, that genuine philosophical pairing of a bold, exuberant spirituality that runs presto, and a dialectical rigor and necessity that takes no false steps, is unknown to most thinkers and scholars from their experience, therefore unbelievable to them if someone were to bring it up in their presence. They imagine every necessity as a need, as a painstaking having to follow and being forced. They regard thinking itself as something slow, hesitating, almost a drudgery, often enough as worthy of a sweat of a noble, but not at all as something light, divine, and most closely related to dance and high spirits. I fucking love that. I really like Nietzsche. It pisses me off. The Philosophy 2 video just fucking angered me because Nietzsche's just poetic as shit. And this section is so it's people every day when you talk about what philosophy is, they have this idea, and I think of like the the Family Guy philosophy moment where he goes, "What are you doing?" "I'm thinking." Like, it's like that. Like that's what philosophers do, is thinking.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's not that. Why do we consider thinking heavy? With Rodin's The Thinker statue, literally heavy, and the first idea of what people do, the first thought of what thought is the weight of thoughts. We talk about this, we speak of it as such, but we don't talk about it as though it is something that is light and divine, as he says, most closely related to dance and high spirits. And the manic side of it, we wouldn't even consider thought because it's not morose and dark and specific. That thinking and taking it seriously or treating it gravely, to them it's the same. Only then have they experienced it. Artists may have a finer nose here, they who know all too well what precisely when they no longer do anything voluntarily and everything necessarily. Their feeling of freedom, subtlety, full power of creative positing, dispositing, and shaping reaching its heights. In short, that necessity and freedom of will become one in them. Of all people, Zizek has the best version of this of anyone. He says it so fucking nicely. He talks about happiness being a conformist category. And it's a great line because he says, if you've ever been in that moment of passionate creation, you're not happy. Happiness wouldn't even be a thing. You'd be confused if someone, are you happy right now? You'd be like, you're ready to die. You're ready to experience pain, and you don't give a fuck. You're just filled with passion, but it's a beauty. It's not a negative experience at all, but that you're ready to die in that. This is what artists experience, the loss of themselves in the passions, when the passions and themselves become one, when necessity and voluntary, it doesn't even matter anymore because you're just charging ahead and you're just moving forward through these things. This is the beauty of thought. And Deleuze goes through the same thing. I like these guys, Wasowski and of course Bergson clearly as well. But he says, in short, that necessity and freedom of the will become one in them. In the end, there is an order of rank. There's an order of rank to states of the soul, which corresponds with the order of rank of problems. The highest problems mercilessly repel anyone who gets too close to them without being predestined for their solution by the height and power of their spirituality. What good does it do when a nimble but ordinary mind, or clumsy but sturdy mechanics and empiricists crowd around them, as happens so often these days, trying with their plebeian ambition to get close to them and into the proverbial court of courts? He is not saying, you could take that literally, he is being an asshole here. This is like the most sarcastic shit, and it reads as the most sarcastic shit. Like, this is sarcastic shit. When nimble but ordinary minds and clumsy but sturdy mechanics and empiricists crowd around them, as happens, trying with their plebeian ambition to get close to them into the proverbial court of courts. But crude feet should not be allowed to touch carpets. This is already taken care of by the primordial law of things. The doors remained closed to these obtrusive ones, even if they pound and pulverize their heads against them. For every high world one must be born, or spoken more clearly, one must be cultivated for it. The right to philosophy, this word taken in its broad sense, is confirmed only by one's origins, and ancestors and bloodlines are decisive here. Many generations must have done the preliminary work for the origin of a philosopher. Each of his virtues has to have been individually acquired, nurtured, passed on, embodied, and not only the bold, light, delicate gait and course of his thoughts, but above all his willingness for great responsibilities, the elevation of his ruling gazes. He looks to his past, and this is true of Nietzsche, this is true of Marx having Engels. Marx didn't have Engels, we wouldn't have Marx. Like, there's a reality to, and Engels wouldn't exist without his family money, like, flatly. Just if you didn't know, like, the history of these things, these people were not paupers, and we need to be very aware of that, and we need to be aware of a philosophy that only works above such points. Nietzsche's making that critique, as well as making the comment that, hey, this is a thing that we need to understand is contingent and almost precious, but it does require that one be a bourgeoisie in some capacity. There has to be some past work done to lay the foundation. Child soldiers in the Congo who are orphaned are not going to be giving us large treatises on the nature of free will. That's not really their jam, and it's not their fault. It's not that it makes them worse. It's the nature of existence that people are going to have. And we need to understand that existence, the material conditions of it, drive people, but that we need to understand that the material conditions drive people. Like, it's a double whammy. It's one of the things I love about it. Sorry for the ramble, sorry.
Well, it builds up on the rest of the parts in part 6. Like, he makes a distinction between the philosopher and the philosophical laborers and the scientists earlier on. Basically calling, well, they're not actually doing philosophers. They are merely doing the groundwork that is dictated by other people, laborers. And
again, it's to get at, like, one of the reasons that I find it very frustrating to have the conversation about because people can come and it's completely justified to go, I don't think Nietzsche meant that. And it's like, cool, I don't care. Like, so I don't give a fuck. like, fuck off. Like, are we trying to get at the truth of what Nietzsche meant by what he said? Or are we trying to get at the truth of what he's saying and how these things can affect us and how we can move on and build from it and what concepts we can create out of it? That's far more interesting, flatly. And so when we talk about this, it's like, yeah, we could read it the other way. I doubt that. I don't believe that's what he meant, given all of his masses of other works. But to read it the other way is to just give that position and to give that spot and go, well, this is what he meant. And it's like, who cares? Who's he? What do you mean by meant? And when he wrote it? How do you know what he, like, these things? This is, again, why I have that opening where I'm talking about the symbolic and how we fill things with it and how we're able to just swap language in and out. The idea of, well, is this what Nietzsche meant? It's like, who cares? Who's Nietzsche? What's a Nietzsche? And he was Nietzscheing just fine as we were making our way through this. And so when Deleuze takes him from behind, as he likes to say, we're not trying to figure out what is the true tree. We're looking at the tree and we're exploring the tree from what we're able to. We're enjoying the fact that we're seeing a brand new tree. We're seeing a new Nietzsche. We're exploring a new Nietzsche and these words and the way they make it work and the way that we're able to build meaning out of it. New every time. New every time.
Yeah.
If you read Nietzsche twice and it's the same meaning to you each time, you have no critical thinking skills whatsoever. I think that's a pretty extreme statement, but I think it's a safe one because it's poetry. You should try to change what you mean each time. And I don't mean majorly, just like a little bit, just like, huh, oh, just enjoy that. Enjoy the reading. Jesus Christ. Sorry, I got a little pissy. Probably should relax a little.
Yeah. Yeah, all right.
Thank you. And just to finish real quick, that because I didn't want to finish reading it.
For sure.
Many generations must have done the preliminary work for the origin of a philosopher. Each of his virtues has to have been individually acquired, nurtured, passed on, embodied, and not only the bold, light, delicate gait and course of his thoughts, but above all, his willingness for great responsibilities, the elevation of his ruling gazes and gazing down, the feeling of being separate from the crowd and its duties and virtues, the affable protection and defense of what is misunderstood and slandered, whether God or devil, the joy and exercise of great judgment, the art of commanding, the broadness of the will, the slow eye that rarely admires, rarely looks up, rarely loves. And it is both sarcastic and also commentary at once. That's why I love that. That's why I love Nietzsche when you read him. Because he's not saying that, he is 100% not saying that philosophers must be bold, light, delicate, and looking down on people. He's making a comment on the way that philosophy is done and how people think about philosophy, that it is from on high, that it does come from on high, and that it comes from these positions. There is a reality to that, and he's being deeply critical. He's being deeply critical in this section. It's very frustrating. All my like boiling up fucking PTSD from that stupid shit is coming back again. Very frustrating.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry for that.
I blame you exactly.
I was just wanting to discuss, well, the things that come before it, because he is deeply critical of, well, lots of people. Well, there is this person he calls the great. Well, I mean, calm could be offensive now, but like just the way he employs those words, like Kant, basically. You know the great the expression that he uses to describe him. It's not a slur or anything. It's just he's calling him Chinese.
He does, in his way, yes.
The great Chinese of Königsberg.
Something like that.
And by that he makes a distinction between philosopher and critic. which I think it's in the 210, 209.
Yep, let me go back. All right. 109 for the time being. I want to express myself only as a parable.
I think it's
Maybe 210. 1 second. I missed 210 because I'm terrible at this. The images of philosopher future, some trait were to suggest whether people they might not be skeptics in the sense just mentioned, then it would only characterize something about them, not who they themselves are. Even the Chinese of Königsberg was only a great critic. Yeah, that's the one. Oh, that's a whole thing. Let's see.
Hello.
Hey
Oh.
there, Cadmus.
Howdy, howdy.
How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing pretty good. Just hanging out. Well, what are we reading here?
We're going over, I think right now we're going over Nietzsche and some things over a couple quotes. It's office hours, so this is kind of just more intended to be open-ended conversation, talking about things, trying to help through ideas, that kind of stuff.
Excellent. Sounds good.
So, more or less, that's the idea. Whether or not we abide by it, I opened with a large rant on my part, which tends to be a thing I do more often than I probably want to admit. But hey, that's the way it works. I'm trying to right now go through Nietzsche and philosophy and go over there's a shift in how Deleuze handles a few of these quotes, and I want to make sure I get it right. So,
Yeah,
otherwise,
it's you have to be really careful. It's one wrong word and, like one of those things about philosophy, or at least advanced topics like that. It's like every word really matters, so you want to kind of do your homework before you speak on it.
Yeah, and it's there's a handful of things. So the way Deleuze talks about it, just to read a little bit, and I'll just pop this back into stream. Come on. Really? Not gonna let me do that? Really? Is that how you work now? Very frustrating. Well, we'll just switch windows then, and I'll just deal with it. 1 moment. Amazing. I have to switch windows with this. Change. This, and I want Nietzschean philosophy there. Boom. And then I switch this window. God damn. The day that, like, there is an act, like, AI is garbage, but I'll tell you right now, if I can go, switch to genealogy of morals, and it does it, I'll be happy. Like, just all this stupid dumb shit that happens inside of these programs is fucking so frustrating.
Yeah. What
There.
PDF reader is that?
I use UPDF.
Okay.
UPDF, I de-Adobe'd my life. So I've got a whole bunch of different stuff going on there. So it's UPDF has been good for the last year or so. There's some features that are missing, but it's one of those things that it's not worth $10 a month and having Adobe eat all of my data and use it for AI. Not my thing.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, you can find the PDF of this PDF of Beyond Good and Evil on the Entire archive. The Adrian Delcal version.
Okay, so it's yeah, whatever what do they call it, where they allow things to go up. I don't know.
It's not a digital lending.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You can just download it.
To read a little bit of Deleuze on this, just because it's worthwhile just for a moment. Yeah, go ahead. Take it upstairs, bud. Sorry, my monkey came in and he is refusing to leave unless he gets a cup of jelly fruit. Take one.
Fair
There
enough.
you go, bud. You absolutely can. Look at how delicious. It's fruity candy. It's actually just a fruit cup, but I tricked him. I tricked him into thinking it's candy. So that way I can go, oh my god. He gets excited about fruit cups. You guys enjoy? Yes, I lie to my child sometimes. Because, do you have any candy? Yes, I have a fruit cup. It doesn't work. But if I say, yeah, look at this, and it's like crazy colors, because it is, they make crazy weird, it doesn't matter.
Well, I think that's a good thing.
I can justify it, and I'm fine with it.
Sure.
I have no idea what a fruit cup is.
It is a small plastic cup with Jell-O that has fruit in it inside of it.
Oh, okay.
Fruit cup. I don't know if it's just an American thing. Very prevalent in like American school lunches when I was growing up. Super prevalent. And now they have like all kinds of weird shit, and it's a whole thing. But back to Nietzsche and Deleuze.
The lows.
To read, because this is where we start talking about the way that's set up, and it's right in the middle here, just to sort of set up where I'm going to be chatting from. Thus, the philosopher can only be born and grow with any chance of survival by having the contemplative air of the priest, of the ascetic and religious man who dominated the world before he appeared. The fact we are burdened by such necessity not only shows what a ridiculous image philosophy has, the image of the philosopher sage, the friend of wisdom and ascesis, but also that philosophy itself does not throw off its ascetic mask as it grows up. In a way, it must believe in this mask. It can only conquer its mask by giving it a new sense, which finally expresses its true anti-religious force. We see that the art of interpreting must also be an art of piercing masks, of discovering the one that masks himself, why he does it, and the point of keeping up the mask while it is being reshaped. That is to say that genealogy does not appear on the first night, and that we risk serious misunderstanding if we look for the child's father at the birth. The difference in the origin does not appear at the origin, except perhaps to a particularly practiced eye, the eye which sees from afar, the eye of the far-sighted, the eye of the genealogist. Only when philosophy has grown up can we grasp its essence or its genealogy and distinguish it from everything that it originally had too great a stake in being mistaken for. It is the same for everything. In all things, only the higher degrees matter. The problem is one of origin. But origin, conceived as genealogy, can only be determined in relation to these higher degrees. He's speaking about very much that thing. He's speaking about it from elsewhere, but that specifically thing. And that's the genealogy of morals, which tends to get bundled with
Beyond Good and Evil.
Beyond Good and Evil. Because a lot of it does cover a lot of these same elements and talks through these things. When we talk about what philosophy is and how it has to play, it has to come of these, and it did early on, and we still see, and I think even today, Deleuze talks about in his time, we're 50 years on, not wildly different. We still have this ivory tower idea of what philosophy is, because the only opposite we have of that is the worst thing, which is the destruction of philosophy when it becomes opinion. When we're just talking about, well, I have a thought and I think, and therefore it's like, no. Philosophy is not thought. Philosophy is also not this academic, difficult nightmare thing that only the ascetic and the priestly classes can do, that only those born into it can have. It's instead understanding when it came about and as philosophy became its own thing, which, by the way, we didn't have philosophers like prior to like 1400. It's not a thing. We had saints, we had priests. That's how that worked. St. Thomas Aquinas, the philosopher, they say, but we didn't say that at the time. The Greeks had this, and then they went away. And philosophers wasn't really a thing, not as we talk about them today. We tend to do that in retrospect only, because it came from this same class, same position, the religiosity, the ascetic nature of this. And that's what Nietzsche is getting at here, the thing he's going at. And it's for Deleuze, the same thing he talks about in, when Deleuze talks about this in What is Philosophy? And he goes through the nature of like philosophy being necessarily Greek. He says Nietzsche says there's no need to wonder what the Greeks owe to the East. Philosophy is Greek insofar as it is in Greece that it attains its higher form for the first time. It shows its true force, its goals. These are not the same as those of the Eastern priest. This is the Zen master, the Buddhist, the Confucian, even when they are made use of. Philosophos does not mean wise man. It means friend of wisdom, but friend must be interpreted in a strange way. Philo, friend of, love of wisdom, friend of wisdom. The friend, says Zarathustra, is always a third person in between I and me, who pushes me to overcome myself and to overcome in order to live. That's Zarathustra of The Friend, page 82. The friend of wisdom is the one who appeals to wisdom, but in a way that one appeals to a mask without which one would not survive. The one who makes use of wisdom for new, bizarre, and dangerous ends which are, in fact, hardly wise at all. He wants wisdom to overcome itself and to be overcome. The people are certainly not always wrong. They have a foreboding of the essence of the philosopher, his anti-wisdom, his immoralism, his conception of friendship, humility, poverty, chastity. We can guess the sense that these wise and ascetic values take on when they are revived by philosophy, by a new force. I really like this shit. Sorry, I just really like this book. I dig it a lot.
Yeah.
Both of you at the same time too. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a lot to kind of digest there, but it's good stuff for sure.
And Deleuze, this is Deleuze's reading of Nietzsche and his thing, and as he talks about it, his goal, and he's upfront. And I'm going to use the terms, and it's awful how he phrases this, but he has no interest in saying, well, here's what Nietzsche meant. Here's who Nietzsche truly was. It's like, good fucking Christ, who cares? For Deleuze, he takes Nietzsche from behind.
And makes a deformed
and
child.
And he produces a monstrous offspring, as he says. I mean, I don't know. Feel free to figure out however you want to phrase that, but he rapes him, and then the mutated baby of offspring he considers to be a good thing. That's how he looks at it. It's great. Buggery, I think, is the term he used one time too. Whole fun thing.
It kind of sort of, I'm not a Hegel expert, but I remember at the beginning of Phenomenology of the Spirit, how he's kind of talking about how to approach philosophy, not to just like, X plus Y equals this. You need to really kind of, I don't know how to describe it, kind of like really get into the philosophy. Just because one philosopher disagrees with the other, you can't just skip the latter one. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't just, why do we need...
This is, what is philosophy? Deleuze goes into and gives what I think is a very interesting way for us to have conversations. One second. Stop fear. You specifically. You're absolutely allowed to, and we love you. Welcome. Ask a question in text. If it doesn't fit, you can join the DGQC. One sec. I have a button for that now, I think. We're going to find out if I do. I should have a button for that. And didn't work.
Discord.
Broken. Excellent. That
GG Sash.
That was just disappointing. That's deeply disappointing. Thank you, Estelle. But otherwise, you can type the question. In What is Philosophy? Deleuze literally writes out, hey, what is the nature of philosophy itself? Like, what is that thing? Because a lot of people use the term, I'm doing philosophy, or I like this philosopher. Like I've said, people use it in a lot of ways. But what differentiates it really from other acts of creation? Because that's that's all Deleuze is really caring about. He's not really interested in like trying to figure out, oh, is this true philosophy or not, as some sort of Platonic setup, but instead, what is the act of creation that philosophy is doing? And he kind of lays it out as a series of elements. The first he goes over is he's like, and he kind of does it in a critique of like, well, some say it's this, but it doesn't work that way. Like he breaks it down. First, he lays out, I shouldn't say first, he lays out art, for example, as the creation of sensations. But it's not just purely the creation of sensations. It's the creation of elements and figura that work together in order to produce sensation in the person who's sort of seeing it. Like that, it's the building of the canvas. It's a process itself that creates a very particular response, a very particular thing that can be used elsewhere. Science doesn't really do that same thing. Science plays in a different way. It creates functives, as he calls it, but they're functions and measurements of the world. They're not creating concepts. They're working in their way. Philosophy, though, philosophy creates concepts, and how philosophy creates concepts and how that works is really particular. And that particular way that philosophy creates concepts and how it works together deals with sort of the historical material realities of how philosophy came about and how it's been used and what it can be used for and what it can produce. Because that act of creation, which is all Deleuze gives a shit about, is like, how do we create new? How do we constantly build? The act of creation that comes with it, the building of a concept, for Deleuze, the body without organs, or pure difference, or, I mean, Derrida had a version of that. Like, concepts themselves, they get paired with a philosopher. If we were to talk about Derridian difference versus Deleuzian difference, they're close, but they play differently, you could say. Play, I like as a phrase for that. But that thing that's happening that's kind of weird, that's the setup. And so when we talk about like what people are making and what people are doing and how people are building, they're putting themselves in these three categories, those ways. And outside of that, there's a lot of other acts of creation, but these are the big three for Deleuze that we see philosophy get confused with. There's a philosophy of art. Well, no, they're building art. There's a philosophy of science. Well, the philosophy of science will be creating concepts around how science works. It's not that science builds concepts by saying, oh, we now have string theory or whatever. That's not really it. Those are explanations and functives and measurements on specific abstract planes. That thing can be played across all of this. This is the interesting stuff sort of overall, if that makes sense. Does that make sense as I'm sort of saying it, like what philosophy specifically is?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I think that last part is important to mention, is that it could be applied to all philosophy, right? Like it's the creation of concepts that's inherent in what actually is philosophy. If I think that was, I don't know, my 2 cents, but yeah.
I think that worked. I think it's an interesting thing. So when you go in and you're looking at like someone in chat's asking stuff, here's like, hey, I'm looking at being in time. It's interesting to me, but it's a fucking nightmare, and it is. Heidegger is not easy to read. What should I read alongside of it? When you're doing and trying to take in philosophy, I think that lens of going in is really important, because when you're talking about learning about the concepts that a philosopher is creating, it gives you a very particular way to go about it and how to read, so you can understand what's really being created in the text. So when you're reading Spinoza, you're not like reading it for the grammar, for example, or the way that mathematically things go together. It's the concepts he's building gives you a focus and a way to sort of build around it. Heidegger is notoriously difficult. I'm not a huge fan personally of a lot of Heidegger's work, although it's worth going through. We had a really fantastic early reading of Heidegger through Deleuze on the server, which was super weird and kind of amazing. For me, the thing that helped me through that, aside from obviously just reading it and making it through and having to have a lot of people in the QC, join the QC where we can help through whatever. Polt's book is the PDF I had. It was like a super top level overview of like Heidegger and what he was kind of doing. And then Gelvin's commentary on Being in Time was another. Those things I think are really, that's where find a secondary source that you find easy to read. That's like, don't listen to me. Fuck my stuff. It doesn't even matter. Like, pick it up, read the beginning, read the intro, go on Amazon and read the first 3 pages. They're usually on there. And if you go, oh, this is something that speaks to me, use that. But remember that it's a secondary source. You have to read the primary. You have to read the primary source and go and then reference, because what you're studying in that lens of learning the concepts of what Heidegger's coming about, I think is a big deal, personally. And being in time is no fucking joke as a thing. Like, it's just a whole thing, playing with Searle's entire line of phenomenology. If you don't have a background in Kant, I'm not even sure you can fully grasp a lot of it. I had issues with it because of my background in Kant, which I ended up reading Kant, but I ended up helping with Deleuze, so that worked out overall. Like, it's a lot, and it is rough. I find it difficult to read. And I say this as someone who reads Anti-Oedipus for fun. Just to put it in context, I read Anti-Oedipus and I enjoy it, and I find it lyrical and poetic. And I find Heidegger difficult. Not difficult like Hegel.
Wow.
Hegel's difficult in a different way, because Hegel has a weird density to his writing that I think once you kind of get a handle on, and thank you, Half Hour Hegel, go watch Gregory Sadler. He runs you through things, and I think that helps. Once you kind of get through that, it's easier. With Hegel, with Heidegger, I don't think it's that same thing. I think it's just tougher to read. Kant is difficult to read too. German idealism in general is like a fucking, for me, everyone else may find it differently. I find it very difficult to like just read that shit. But again, I can pick up like Bataille and plow through it, and it's like beautiful. It's fucking difficult. If that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up books that I happen to have, and I got Anti-Oedipus, and I read like, I don't know, 3 or 4 pages, and I was just like, what in the hell is going on? I'm trying to, it's one of those, man, I'm not an expert by any, stretch of the imagination, and I only started reading philosophy a few years ago. So even though with the internet, there's a lot of other sources, So.
Anti-Oedipus is a unique thing, and it's, people who come to it like as one of their first off, most people go right to 1,000 Plateaus, skip it, and then think they understand Deleuze. Anti-Oedipus is one of those things that's very tough to get because it's based on and built on the backs of a lot of other concepts and thinkers. I happen to have kind of made a roundabout way. The first time I read AO years and years ago, I didn't get it. I thought I understood it. I should say. I thought I understood it. I did not, as I look back, understand it. That is not a thing that existed for me as a setup. I don't know how else to put it. 1 second. This fucking thing put me back at the lower volume. Motherfucker.
Be right back. 1 sec.
This put me at the higher volume. What the fuck is going on? Sorry, everyone. Just 2 seconds. I'm just going to swap a thing and swap a thing. Just go whoop, and then we're going to go whoop. We're going to whoop, and then we're going to go there, and then whoop. And I'm louder here now. Okay. I fucking hate OBS. I hate all this shit. Hey, you ever work in a real broadcast studio? Real broadcast studios don't have these problems because they're not built like this. This is so reliant on like plugins and other secondary stuff and like scenes, and the folder structure is complex. And if you have a plugin that does another sort of thing, it'll fuck with, it's just a nightmare. Sorry for the bitching. But as I was saying, I thought I understood Anti-Oedipus, but it was one of the books that sort of took me down a path. I ended up going deep into Lacan and Zizek, and through Zizek, Hegel, and thank you, Sadler, again. And as I made my way, I started having more and more issues with things that I was reading, and I couldn't quite put a finger on it. And I ended up making my way back to Deleuze, but through Guattari, who had a critique of Lacan that someone sent me, and then it got me back. So it was like this nightmare. But what I found is all of that traveling I did gave me a better chance to actually grasp AO. And then when I did my second reading, I fell in love with the book. Still didn't understand it. Thought I did. And it's only through our hardline readings. Again, we're in our third reading here. Almost finished. We're like halfway done with we're one more chapter from the end. And we've been going for literally 5 years as of next week. And that thing puts you in a place where you have a better grasp, a repeated grasp. You're going over things, you're going over other texts. And Deleuze is, like I used to joke, he's like the Family Guy of philosophers. It doesn't work for you if you don't have all the same references as Seth MacFarlane. Doesn't work as a thing. And there's an episode of South Park that the Tooth Fairy episode. If you know it, you know it. If you don't, you don't. Tooth Fairy episode is built on if you grew up in Littleton, Colorado, where I grew up and where they grew up, all the references are there. Otherwise, this episode's like the worst episode there is. But it's hilarious otherwise. Same kind of thing. Deleuze pulls from all of these thinkers over and over and over so often that you end up in a place that's like, you don't have anything else. You've got to make your way through it. Heidegger's not quite that, has a lot of that, but it's not quite the same. I still find Heidegger very difficult to read. And some people make fun of me for it, and that's fine. It's very tough. Very tough. Heidegger's tough. Joanna says, all philosophy includes sciences at large. Well, it depends on what you mean. And this is the Deleuze sort of thing in the way he separates it out. There's the philosophy of science, necessarily. But philosophy doesn't create scientific elements, and science doesn't create philosophy elements. What they produce, the stuff that they work on, the things that are new, they necessarily play differently in what they do and how they interact. And there's a whole bunch of stuff he lays out that I think is really fantastic in terms of like a philosophy of science. I fucking love it. It's in line with like Whitehead all the way through to Latour and others. Very, very clearly. Like, here's what science is actually doing. So it'd be like saying, well, look, this stuff's lyrical. It's like poetry. Philosophy and poetry is not that far apart. And it's like, they're super different. Poetry is an effective experience that someone's crafting for you by creating the canvas and the words and the placement and playing with all of that. A philosopher isn't doing that. The philosopher is trying to create concepts that through which you can find ways for them to interact. And again, as he says, philosopher means the friend of wisdom. Concepts are friends. We play with friends. We work with friends, but they're multifaceted. They're complex. They're machines in and of themselves that are multifaceted. That thing isn't the same as a piece of art. It works differently and plays differently. It's really interesting. And again, he's not privileging philosophy. He's very clear on that. There's no privileging of philosophy versus art or anything else. This is, to him, it's almost the three parts of what we make. One is the measurements of the world. One is the concepts through which we sort of bring things together, and the art, which is the sensational aspects and effective elements, the figura, through which we're able to have larger sort of... These things aren't everything. There's opinion. There's dogmatic images of thought. There's the nature of how the brain brings all of these things together in the subject, and how all of this is produced, and then we shit out our mouths. And the philosophers are not just philosophers. Scientists aren't just scientists. Artists aren't just artists. Everyone is a person, but the fields are producing differently. Really great. What is Philosophy? Highly recommend as a read. Super short, really solid, really dense. But yeah.
What did you say? What is philosophy? Is that a book?
What is philosophy? Qu'est est philosophie?
Okay.
Qu'est-ce que la philosophie?
Blah, 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 blah. That's Terrence Blake, who I asked when I, like 3-4 years now, he joined our Logic of Sense readings, and I was like, because he kept being able to refer back. He moved from Australia to study under Deleuze. He actually studied under Deleuze in France. He has the weirdest accent that's ever existed. I love it. Australian, it's French through Australia. It's great. But he said, I was like, I'm too stupid to ever speak it. I've traveled. I've spent like probably altogether like multiple months in France. If you were to put everything together, I can't do shit with that fucking language. And I never will. And he goes, no, don't think about it like this. Try to read it, because reading it, you'll get really good at really fast, because it's not wildly different than the stuff you're reading already. You'll recognize words, you'll recognize structures, it fits. He's like, what did he say? He was like, I was in France and I could read complex philosophy after like a year, but I couldn't order a baguette to save my life. And I empathize with that, because now that I like can pick up a book and I've still got my translator pen and I still, do all that, but like I can't fucking speak at all. Like I tried Duolingo for a year and a half. No, the shit's out the door. It's fucked up. So I have fortunately, a lot of very kind French people or people who speak French who are happy to take pot shots at me and laugh.
Laugh we will.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, like, playful laugh. I don't know.
It's fine. I don't mind it.
So you're telling me you are not some sort of prodigy savant that can pick up foreign languages overnight? Jeez.
I know. And look, it's going to kill my ratings. It's going to kill my viewership. Everyone wants someone who's purely brilliant and clearly born into the perfect position of knowledge and has a flawless brain and is able to be just perfect in every way, so they can see themselves in that and have a parasocial psychotic relationship where all you do is jerk off over how happy you are that person's doing well in their life. And I'm sorry, it's not me. I am deeply imperfect, deeply flawed. I didn't go to college just as a thing. I wish I had. I'm regretting it a great deal, despite having a huge amount of success in my professional life. It's, you want a frustrating thing, like deeply frustrating thing. And I won't say this about philosophy. I got a long way to go before I'm even interested in the world of philosophy. But in the world of interactive, I won, Tribeca and Sundance film festivals with a VR piece that I co-directed. I've been in interactive and video games for forever. And, I'm kind of tired of the games industry. And so I actually hit up, Oregon State University. I'm in Southern Washington, and Washington State University. And I was like, hey, I'm looking to teach. I know it's not great money, but I want to have a class. I'd love to impart knowledge and help, get the next generation excited, because they're fucked. They're fucked. I want to be able to help. And I got down the road in interviews at one of those places. The other one, it died earlier for the same exact reason. And they're excited, and they went, hey, it's great. So where did you go to school? And I'm like, oh, I didn't. They're like, oh, well, you can't teach. That's it. That's the end of the discussion. And I was like, well, okay, can I go to school then? And they're like, sure, it'll be a 4-year degree you need. But I'm like, so I have to go to 4 years of all the stuff that I know. And I'm an old person now. This is a very difficult thing for me to do. And so how do I teach that part of me? And this is where, like, the QC is born out of this frustration I've had, which is the other direction. I don't want to go to school for 12 years for philosophy. I would love to spend time with people who have done that, and I'd love to learn from them, but I don't have that. Like, being an academic's not my thing, but I want to learn. I want to teach. I want to impart. And I'm not alone in that. A lot of people want to spend the right amount of time, do the right thing by learning the right way. But there isn't any extra academic spaces to enable that. Anti-Oedipus is the king of this, as far as I'm concerned. There is, this is overstating, but it's a lot of philosophy books. There's very few books that are as misinterpreted and maligned and fucked with as Anti-Oedipus and Deleuze in general. The number of people who call themselves Deleuzian is embarrassing. But on top of it, the number of people who've never really read Anti-Oedipus, or all the way through 1,000 Plateaus, they've read 2 Plateaus and they think they get it. It's horrifying. But that thing, there isn't a place to do anything else. It's an either or. It's either you're going to school for philosophy or you're going to not do it. And if you don't do it, you're doing the plebe version, where it's like, oh, I'm going to read a book and watch a Plastic Pills video, and that's enough. A philosophy tube, basically. And then you end up in this place where it's like Philosophy Tube and Contra have degrees in philosophy, apparently. I still am deeply shocked that that's the case. But if that's the level of knowledge you come out with a degree, at that level, again, not an academic career, minor degree, you're fucked. You're not going to understand this stuff. But this is true of anything. The video game industry, unless you're going for comp sci and you go for a long time and you happen to get the right setup, the right internship, you're not getting a games job. Like, you're fucked out of college almost entirely. Because there's a lot of people doing this. This is true kind of in general. So how do you fill that gap? Because the pros on the one side and the amateurs, and there's nothing in the middle. That's what the QC is hoping to do for philosophy. If we can crack it, have some semblance of pedagogy, if we can figure that out, then there's room for us to help not just me, but others make their way through this. Oh, I'm having issues with this philosopher. Excellent. Here are resources. Here are people to support. Here's how we do it. Here's the way we think. Here's how we push. And if you want to make your way, go do that next step. But being that middle ground is a huge deal.
And like,
Sorry for the rant.
I mean,
That's what I do. That's what I do.
No, I love it. Rant away. I like hearing it.
If you don't mind, Brooks, I'd love to just add on to that little rant. Not with a rant, but just add a little additional context to this as someone relatively recently out of the university system, last decade, that there is something really important to the reading group as a learning space and a learning process in general. Now, back when I was an undergrad and then as a postdoc, the university system, especially in Anglo-Western spaces as I've encountered them, is under intense contraction, both in form, design, and its reason for being. It has become a profit engine as well as a labor engine. The mode of pedagogy has been crushed down into some very particular forms, under some very particular modes of administration and managerialism. When I was an undergraduate, I was extremely, extremely fortunate that I probably caught the last of a generation of scholars from, the 70s and 60s who were of that generation who, for them, an important way of grappling with key texts was you sit down, you start at page 1, and you read together. And you try and figure things out, and you try and ask questions, and you don't just learn about the text, you also learn about how to learn, how to read. People will point out different reading strategies for different texts. People will pull up different references for contextualizing different passages. And there's also just that shared process of thinking together, reading an aphorism or a passage and sitting back and just a 30-second silence and going, shit, I actually don't know what's going on here. Does anyone else have that? It's really important to stress that. Well,
it's to just on that. When we do our readings, a lot of people who've come in this last reading, for example, which is I think a good number of people, we tend to have a lot of turnover in the space. But they'll join AO and they'll be like, Jesus, Brooks, how do you know all this? And it's like, you don't go back and listen to like the first run through, and what you'll see is, and it's what made this thing work, is that I am a fucking moron and I accept it. And if more people were morons and accepting it, we'd be in a better place. I am a believer in Rancier's idea of the ignorant schoolmaster. I ran the first set of AO meetings. After Craig went and did Acid Horizon and fucked off to do whatever, I didn't want to give up. I wanted to learn about this book. I didn't want this thing to die, and a lot of other people were with me. But no one else was like willing to do that. So I was like, fuck it. And that fact of like, I'd read and I'd go, okay, I'm now going to say it, and I would say this. Here's what I think it is. I'm wrong, but you tell me why I'm wrong. And then someone would go, no, that's not right. And I'd be like, thank you. And they'd correct me. And as we would go, and as people would correct me, they'd begin building off of each other. And what would happen is, without knowing it, one, they're all teaching me, which is great, because I got to abuse a whole bunch of really smart people to teach me. But on top of it, the number of people who've listened to the AO reading, we're talking about tens of thousands of people over the course of the 5 years, which is an incredible number of individual people. But the number of people who've done that and gone on that journey and made it through even a slight bit they've come out better the other side, every single person. And that thing
and this
is the deal.
I was just going to, yeah, and I was really going to stress that, like, a part of the project of the QC isn't just anti-Oedipus. It is holding on to this form of learning, the reading group. And the point I was getting to with relating some of my experiences with the university system is that when I talk now to colleagues and such who are still in the university system, there are no reading groups. Even in the philosophy departments, you have courses where they might handle a handful of texts and some secondary literature, but it is extraordinarily hard, at least in Australia, to find a university that has, we're just doing one book on the semester, we're just reading The Social Contract for 6 months. And this is something that institutionally and industrially we are losing.
That's a
It
shame.
is really, really important that we actually create spaces in which we can carry this way
Well, it's
of
difficult.
reading and learning forward.
The reason we're losing those spaces is the reason that these spaces continually die. Because there's, and I'm going to actually use as someone in Queen of Swords, and I'm picking up the comment because it's spot on, but I want to critique it because it's an important specific critique. Queen of Swords says, the fact I'm here is evidence that Contra and Philosophy Tube can be entryways. But then people stand in the entryway and say, you can't criticize us, it's an entryway. This is 100% true. This is a great way to describe it. But that thing, that activity, how did they become an entryway? They only became an entryway when they started to be terrible. It turned out they were bad at what they did. That's the deal. That's the thing to remember. Because when they started, Philosophy Tube was ostensibly actually doing philosophy. Contra's actually teaching about theory. That's what they were. They were the theory side of BreadTube. They were the theory side of these things. And here, what happens? This is, by the way, the evolution of things. People didn't know how to do theory online. How do you do theory on popular culture and YouTube and deal with a thing? I didn't know at the time. No one does. No one still knows now how to do philosophy properly in a way that can be taught mass media online. That was an attempt. A good attempt. A lot of people watched it. But then they became a thing. Deleuze and Guattari write about two things in AO that are, one of them confuses the fuck out of people. One is production. We get this, the creation of something new. The other's anti-production. Anti-production is not the destruction of production. It's not like antimatter. Anti-production is not the creation of something new, but the maintenance of the production of what has been. The maintenance of a structure. Anti-production is also produced. It's also something that energy is expended in. So when someone like ContraPoints, someone like Philosophy Tube creates their channel, they're building something new. Kudos to them. Where they lose themselves is that they begin to identify with that thing, that structure, whatever Philosophy Tube is, or Contra is, or what fans expect of them, or what is expected of them. And that thing that gets made, that structure at large, that organism that has a life of its own and falls back on all the rest of production, you have a problem. Because now you have to expend energy to keep that alive. Because that's a thing. It was successful, and you need to maintain profit in order to maintain survivability in our world. No fault there. But because you're no longer changing, anti-production is the energy you're spending. You're not creating new, you're maintaining. And other people then maintain that structure. They're invested in that same structure. And that thing hardens. So something new has to come along and crack that and break it. This is the nature of how capitalism works. Something new comes, destroys, re-territorializes, off we fucking go. This thing happens. This is how academia is doing the same thing. The idea of what academia was and how it's built over time, there's always, and it's not in just when I say this, there is a reputation in the last few hundred years that students are the revolutionary capacity of a people. That's not just me saying that. I'm not like making up a thing. The reality is we know young people are the agents of change. We push for that. And especially students at college who tend to be the people who are slightly more free to be open to that, who are able to be a little bit more revolutionary. There's a capacity there. As that happened and as capital intertwined, anti-production, the structure itself became a thing. The maintaining of that structure is now where people are invested. It's now where people are spending time. But now that's working against the very nature of what it's supposed to be across the board. It's not It's not even really a place of learning for a lot of people. It's people go and it's a place of preparation for labor. It's not for the creating of the new, except for very special people who are placed in very particular circumstances. So you have this same problem across everything. This is the nature of capital. This is when they talk about the inner and outer limits of capital. This is the setup. This is how capitalism works. We have big new surge of new, and then we contract as we harden around the thing until this next one, because we know the next surge of new will destroy whatever we're invested in, and we're terrified of it. And that setup is the thing that is continually going back and forth, and the new constantly is pushing. And if you don't join in, if you don't allow yourself to ride the wave, if you don't find a way to constantly be making something new, you will find yourself becoming the thing that you hated growing up. I look at Stephen Colbert as like my example of this these days. If you haven't watched Stephen Colbert lately, he's trying to do his thing. Stephen Colbert was a deeply, deeply anti-everything comedian. He was sarcastic, sardonic, broke rules, shattered how things were done, completely fucked with everything across the board. If you haven't watched Strangers with the Candy, you wouldn't know 100% what I'm talking about, but his thing was constantly upending the structure. And now, as the host of The Tonight Show and, trying to make his way through it, he's doing what he can, but it's kind of past its prime and he knows it, but he's got to keep it going, but he can't do it. So he's doing comedy that goes up to that edge, and you can watch him do it and watch him not make those steps. And sometimes he jumps over and it's great, but you can see that thing and that thrust and that pullback. He's deeply successful. People will say I'm a hater or whatever. No, it's good for him, but he's not doing the thing anymore. The thing that breaks all of those rules, the thing that shattered what old comedy was that he was part of. And that thing is part of the setup. We begin to believe in our own structures. We find production not really producing new, but instead caught in those structures with anti-production effused at every turn, building us into these neutralized walls that we can't move outside of, that we can't get past. And suddenly we're a simulacra of ourselves. Queen of Swords, you can watch him simulate himself. You can watch all these people do this now. And it's when they don't make that change and they don't make that shift, you see it happen. You find people trying to do this and then having the world respond negatively to it. Some make it through, some push through, others don't. It's really fascinating, but that thing is the challenge across the board. And it's what the QC has fought this. We don't have a ton of people. It's not like we have a variety of humans that are in there. Generally speaking, the QC has I want to say white cis dudes, and that's it, with a minority of women or trans women. Sorry, the reality is mostly me's. And what that does is it puts us in a position where the same, because I'm like other dudes like me, that we like stuff and we push for it because we like that stuff, but we're not doing it in a way that's exclusive. We're forward thinking, we're going, but it's naturally exclusive because it's pushing into things that other people aren't attracted to. But we don't have anyone pushing for those things. I'm attracted to other stuff. I just don't know to look at it. Why does a dog focus on a squirrel and not, the random grass? Because of the beast of it all. What we're desire is pushing. We are that thing over and over. So how does the QC survive? Every 9 to 10 months, I literally delete everything. It's not a joke. If you haven't seen behind the scenes of the mod scene, or you haven't noticed, every year I destroy everything. It's not a joke. I literally do this to make sure that we keep going. But that thing that we do, there's a reason. It's because I don't want stability. We don't want to have that stable space. We want to have it changing, and it's tough to do. People don't like it. People really don't like instability. They really don't like having things sort of swept out from under them because they get comfortable. They do. That's the nature of the beast over and over. Comfort is just so delicious. It's a big old warm blanket. Warm blankets are great. Are you kidding me? I love warm blankets. It's fantastic.
I like cold pillows myself, but warm blankets are definitely tight.
Yeah, I think the point, and as we do that, when we destroy stuff, we have really interesting turnouts because suddenly the space wasn't what it was. When someone enters a new chat that's fairly empty, or it's stuff like it hasn't hardened into what we have a chat room called Memeplicity. It's a joke pun. I have a lot of joke puns because I hate them, and I think it's funny that I hate them. It's a long story, but that channel, what it means and what it is settled. That's kind of the only one. Otherwise, we'll throw up a new channel for this, change its name to this, do this. We have current events and local events. We have people asking, wait, local to who? It's my favorite fucking thing when people ask that. Wait, local events? Local where? I like that as a thing. Pretty great. Because the answer is local to you. Just post. And people do. And now we have conversations in there that we didn't have before. Before we had global events, not local events. This is counterintuitive. And I can tell you, I have data to back this up because Discord shows me data. We had global events and we called it American Oedipus. And that was the way we set it up. And American Oedipus was filled with everything. It was everything. And I mean global events too. And our global events thing was mostly Israel and Ukraine. So because how people saw that and how people went to that is they went, well, it has to be of global concern. That's how they understood that symbol and that representation. So they went, oh, well, it's going to be things that are globally concerning. A referendum in Australia in my county, that's not a global concern. It's not for me. Even though it's global, because it's not, but that didn't work. So we changed it. Now it's current events and local events. And the number of posts overall has exploded by almost 3x in both places because it changes what the conversation is. It changes what these places mean. That setup shifts what people are expecting, and it opens up room for new conversations. So now we have discussions where we have a handful of Aussies here right now, and the Aussies here, you're having convos on our server about local shit in Australian politics with other people in Australian politics, and also Americans and other people talking about your local thing, asking questions about it, and being curious, because local means local to you, but I'm also curious about it. So it changes the conversation. And I can tell you in the data, it just opens up how people are going to talk. That's 2 words of a Discord channel that shifted how all of that was done. So imagine the structure that, and that had a structure before. Now imagine the structure that's in place inside of YouTube, Philosophy Tube, Left Tube, Bread Tube, whatever the fuck, and all the other shit that goes with it. Imagine how hardened that shit is and fucking brutal that is for you. Just imagine how insane of that anti-production and that structure has to be. Like, that's fucking nuts. That's nuts when you think about that. And if it happened in the channel at that level on a shitty Discord server that, like, I know we're not big. Like, I'm not saying like we have 1 million people. Like, it went up by 2/3, which is probably like 6 versus 2, actually, maybe. But that growth, imagine that everywhere else. Go out into your life and realize this is what, when we talk about the idea of gender, this is that thing. If 2 words in a Discord chat can change that conversation that much, imagine how much not having the word gender be decided before you talk to someone. Imagine how life-changing that would be to just not have to give a shit about that and just see what happens. There you go. That's the entirety of the conversation we need to have. Sorry. There you go.
Yeah, that was a very interesting, idea that changing to local politics. I not to get on the philosophy or deeper thing, but just the fact that people got interested in other people's local issues, and you can help, just discuss that. That's cool. I like it.
It comes from I come from the world of video games, and specifically I came to video games from web development. I made online communities, and I worked in like online stuff in like, I want to say 1999 to 2001. I made websites and fan sites for a couple of bands. It's a long story.
Sure.
And but it got me into data. Like, metrics was a thing that was just coming about. I made my way into marketing and then through that into video games. And then I got to work with some really interesting people who, in the world of video games, spend time in the theory side. And for them, one of them is Matthias Warch, the other is Clint Hawking. And the way that we talked about games was amazing as they sort of wrapped around and they went, what people don't understand in the world of video games is how people sort out visually what they can make sense of and how they do it. Matthias has an incredible piece where he talks about the overt simplicity or the over complexity and how a proper video game needs to design, as he puts it, patterns that are not recognizable in themselves, like it can't be a checkerboard, but you also can't have a cloud of random pixels that are black or white, that are tiny. You need enough information that it seems like there's a pattern, even if there isn't. The knowledge of that, the ability to see that, is what people need to explore. If they can recognize a pattern and be done with it, the structure's there, they're over. If they can see no pattern at all and they don't think it's possible, they won't even try, they'll assume it's unknowable. So the sweet spot in development is always that middle thing, giving people enough information, but not enough overall. We're going to pull up his fucking slides right now, because Matthias is awesome. And I used to use his slides a lot.
There's a parallel here with the incredible influence of architectural organization of space in the real world, but also with the digital organization, with the organization of digital architecture. It's very, very easy for us to underestimate the semi-conscious decisions we make to move through space depending on how it is arranged and organized. A really classic example is you enter a room, there's a whiteboard on one wall, and there is a row of tables organized sequentially with chairs like pews in a church. You know, obviously the schoolroom, the children sit down, face the teacher, you have the structure of the audience facing the speaker. But you change the organization of those tables, the very same tables and chairs, into, say, a circle or a square where all the chairs are facing inwards, and the dynamics of hierarchy have subtly shifted. And we can see examples like this in the ordinary organization of spaces in the real world, but we somehow seem to think and feel that those kinds of very subtle influences of the organization of space are magically suspended and inoperable when we move to a screen or to a Discord server. The architectures of space have a profound influence on us, and I think the discussion there on local versus global news is a great demonstration of that, and it's really, really good callback to thinking about the ways in which we semi-consciously orient ourselves in relation to the structures by which we are carried through a space and an interaction and a world.
With that, I'm gonna run to the restroom. We're gonna do this Matthias Warch thing, and I'll end up hitting up Matthias afterwards and be like, "Hey," because I haven't annoyed him in a while. But we'll do that. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Return in a moment.
Yeah, you aren't just being of electoral politics.
We are, just so you know, we are back live on the YouTube.
I didn't know. Cool.
Brooks, I have a question.
You
pertaining
do?
to,
What?
yeah, I have a question. In terms of the audible imperialism, right?
Uh-huh.
I kind of like stifled a little bit in reading, right?
Okay.
So what like the institutional analysis that try to trace its difficulty, or difficult path between the repressive asylum and the legalistic hospital, right? In the one hand, and this kind of like, is it like related to the mythical figure and the representation of the, or I will use representation and partial object interchangeably, right?
Nope.
Because like it seems that that there is a kind of a critique of castration, right? The idea of critique of castration from a standpoint that like daddy, mommy, like these kind of like representations, right? And what's the mean? Like I want to know, like what's the section about audible imperialism? Like what is kind of like why Deleuze said like audible imperialism, right? Why kind of like, yeah.
The specific way that Oedipus works, it's not specifically that Oedipus is like the cause and ill of all man's problems. It's through the way that Oedipus functions inside of the larger sort of social setup that he puts together with Guattari and Anti-Oedipus. Inside of that larger thing, specifically, you're able to actually understand how representation has functioned and shifted us into a place where where repression is something that is made private and internal. The way that Oedipus does this is over time, the way that it begins sort of peeking its head up as not really something that exists per se, but instead a negation, a deferred element, the way that Oedipus, the incest prohibition exists. But again, the rest of it doesn't happen at that position inside of prehistoric or pre-writing groups. When we move into writing, we move into the despotic and the imperialist element of things. Suddenly, we have a lot more that's being added to Oedipus, specifically the nature of how the symbolic on high, the despotic meaning, the chain, blah, blah, blah. These things come back in. This is part of chapter 3.
Yeah.
Capital introduces the final bit because we move from having a on high meaning, but instead to a privatized internal repression. And through how Oedipus moves, we're able to actually see that representation overall is doing this. This is why when I talk about like my critique of the symbolic, let's say if I were to say that mom's a bitch, who am I talking about? Well, when you hear that, am I talking about your mom, who I had sex with last night, probably? That joke, am I talking about your mom or your mom or your mom or your mom? Am I talking about your mom? Because mom is a global person. It's a symbol of a thing. The way that Oedipus gives us a symbol of mom, dad, me, and requires that as its creation, incest can't exist. Oedipus can't exist unless we have that. Unless we have that specific thing. You don't have to go out of your way to like not want to fuck your kids and have your kids not want to fuck you. This isn't like, we're not actually there. That's not how desire really functions. So do we need this specific categories of people? How Oedipus functions is by creating those categories in us and having us taught those categories and having our parents visit that guilt upon us, which reinforces that symbolic structure in those relationships, which then we're able to reinforce everywhere. But it's not mom, dad, me that is reinforced everywhere. That's not the thing. It happens, but that's not the thing. It's the structure of the mom, dad, me that is reinforced everywhere. How that process happens to enable mom, dad, me to exist. It's not that Oedipus is everywhere ruining everything. It's that the process that allows Oedipus to go everywhere and ruin everything is also in everywhere and everything. Does that make sense? It's a very meta conversation.
Sense. Yeah, it's a meta conversation, and how can I say it? The the idea, like even like Deleuze and Freud, I don't know about Freud, but Deleuze and Freud agree on the idea of Deleuze hammering down about especially in the audible empiricism about the how kind of like the later kind of psychologists, right, misinterpret like Freud, right, in terms of the idea that Freud doesn't rely on, especially in his early essays, right, in the later essays, sorry, right. I'm talking about the 1920s essays, right. He doesn't rely on the how can I say it, the organ, all right, the organ, the organ is not like the how can I say it? The phyllis is not the matter at such, right? That's why it's kind of like, it's not about the how can I say it? It's not about the phyllis as such, but it's about something that it's like how can I say it? It's
I don't
about
know.
like
I don't know. I'm trying. I'm kind of following a little bit. It's getting a little tougher. Just to be honest, it's a little bit tougher.
Yeah, but the how can I say it? It's not about like the they have a symbolic emphasis on the organ, right, as such, right. There's a investment on the organ. How can I articulate that? There's an investment on the organ in the sense that
there's an investment in the structuration of the organs and how they're connected. There's an investment in the mouth, the anus, the phallus, these other elements.
Exactly. Thank you. Exactly. Right. And Freud, Deleuze shows that this is besides the point, right? It's the fact that there's no investment on these, right? Even he said something interesting, right? He's quote, in this respect, Kautsky has convincingly shown that the inverse relation that pulls the fantasy into distinctions and the economic law enables the perversion in the psych exchange or the psych exchange.
I'm gonna stop. I'm not gonna be able to follow. I'm sorry. My brain is. Can we do this another day? Because this is a deeper thing, and this is like getting into the deep part of AO. Are you gonna be around tomorrow around this time?
Yeah.
Can we do it then? Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Just because I want to be able to prep a little bit for it, and my brain is like, whew. And I want to kind of move on to the lighter thing because my brain is like wanting to relax a little bit and talk about video games. I'm sorry. It sucks, but that's like where my brain is at. That's where I'm at right now. Sorry. I feel bad. I want to talk about video games and then get to other questions and things. So,
it's heavy,
we'll do that.
It's heavy stuff. It's heavy.
No, it gets really heavy, and I want to kind of continue on the same thread because when we get back to what Marcellus Wallace is talking about, which we will tomorrow, that's the deeper, I would say, really philosophical conversation. I want to stay in a place that's a little bit more practical, because when we talk about how people make choices or how people become distracted or find out or decide what to do, this is one of the things that video games, I think, taught me over time. And I think anyone who's a developer overall, who's played in the space, or even gamers, understand that one of the challenges of video games is you don't always know where to look. And it's not that you always look where you want to. In fact, the world of video games is built by distractions. That's what it is. So how is it that you come to look at the things you do? Why do you make the choice to look at the things you do? And here is where we talk about that connection, disjunction, conjunction, the process of the three syntheses as Deleuze is talking about. Because even the choice of where to look, you're not choosing. No one in video games will be like, oh, look, I guess he chose to look over it. That's not how it works. And we know this because we've done the studies, we've done the work, we have the multitude of video games. This presentation here, and I want to sort of have it show up, This is Matthias Warch, who I was fortunate to work with. These are games he was a designer on. He's been around for a while. He, I think for the last few years, has been leading Epic's R&D development department. So Matthias is, he kind of knows his shit. He's all right.
Cool.
The way he sort of talks about these things, he did a talk a few years before. He does them every year at GDC. He used to run the level design summit, like a boot camp kind of thing. And he talks about this thing, player stories and designer stories, because he wanted at the time, and it's a thing that just never really landed, I think, with a lot of people, understanding the difference that the designer story is the story we think we're telling when we're building a game, but players are always building their own stories. By the way, this is not an allegory for video games. This is beyond that. This is a big setup. Cat on YouTube says, I just say you have one of the best beards on YouTube? Thank you. It's one of the few things I will take a compliment on the beard. But Matthias, and as he was working on this, his push was trying to get at the separation. The way he talked about it is this. I hope all of you can see those slides. The player story is the unique and personal emergent narrative that arises when a player traverses a game's possibility space. This is how he defined it. I love this. This is, to me, how Deleuze sees the emergent nature of desiring production, the subject crossing across things, and the space of the virtual becoming actual. This is how I came to all of this. But this is how Matthias in 2012, when I was working with him, was talking about these things. So the way that he talks about this overall is it's about strong player stories are always found in games rich in agency. Now, agency in video games, and how he's talking about it, is not agency when we're talking about like someone who's free to make choices. No, it's a satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results of those choices. It's a different thing when we talk about it in games. And I think it's important to just have that sort of delineation, because we're not talking about agency in sort of I hear a lot of people talking about it. Oh, I want agency. I want to be able to free to do anything I want to do. It's like, no, that's not really what agency is. That's like a meaningless version. Agency is a satisfying power to take meaningful action. Potestas versus potentias in Spinoza, to be frank. And so he kind of breaks these things up as three elements. There's systemic agency. How can I do something? Spatial agency, where I can do something, and scheduling agency, with whom or what as a thing. These three sort of come together, but ultimately the systemic agency, the how I do a thing, that's the fundamental part of what makes emergence. That's what allows people to move. If there is no options to do a thing, if the how is answered and there is no agency there, the power to take meaningful action and find that back, you have not just a shit game, you have an experience that's bad. And again, apply this across. This is not an allegory. This is talking about how agency and personal repression operates within stanchion sort of elements. We'll get to that. So, in other words, this kind of game that has this without those other two is still a great game, even if a player can't choose multiple paths through the levels, or if they can't customize their character or play with their friends. You can still make a great game that does this. And the way he describes it is the comparison to a game he designed, which is on the right, Dead Space 2, which had it's a linear game. It's a fucking linear game. It's a fucking linear game. You don't actually choose where you're going at all. But Dead Space 2 is fucking awesome. Doom, everywhere you're going around, there's all this option. That thing that is doing here, usually this is used to make fun of games. They're not as good as they used to be. But it's like, wait, the actual experience of Dead Space 2 was very similar. It was just enjoyable. I felt agency. I felt I could do things because it didn't matter those other elements. The systemic thing underneath it. The map is one dimension. It's one thing you lay on top of and but it's bullshit. When you play about it and you think about it, well, it's because systemic freedom is there in both games. Systemic freedom is there. It may not have spatial freedom in one. There's no scheduling freedom in Doom at all. Player stories, it's fine. It's there. But there's a lot of systemic agency, how you go about a thing, how you make those decisions. They're similar in complexity of the low-level gameplay interactions that they create. So this thing he played with, he's like, this needs to die because games with linear levels can still have a sense of strong personal story because it's not about the map. You might recognize this from other discussions we've had. So today, and he loved using this, I'm just going through his slides and I'm kind of doing from memory what I think I have. The way he talks about this, he did this thing and he's like, the problem is it wasn't actionable because people would come away and they'd go, I love this. What do I do? How do I do this? How do I build games? How do I enable players in these ways? How do I set up to do this? And the challenge is, and I love how he phrased it on this slide, it's because agency isn't a thing you build. Agency is a result. It's a player-facing definition of gamers feeling empowered when they make meaningful decisions they've chosen. My analysis is not bound to be useful to designers. It's not. But the biggest reason it wasn't helpful is because of 3 assumptions he made. First, in my mind, it was crystal clear that agency is always the result of affording meaningful choice to the player. It's an unspoken assumption. And so he just assumed when I tell you about things like multiple approaches to a concept space, like BioShock's Big Daddy, you could always take 3 or 4 paths. Everyone automatically knows how and why those approaches are meaningfully differentiated. After the fact, if I were to tell you all the different ways that you can go about a Big Daddy fight in BioShock, which is a game we talked about quite a bit at the time, you have no idea what makes one act different than another. You'll see this in trailers a lot for video games that come out these days. You'll see people talk about look, you can go about it stealthy. You can go about it this way. You can go this. And it's like every time you show one of those, that's great, but you haven't shown me the distance between them. What are the options? Why are these options? Are these options far away? Are they pressing A versus B versus C as a button and they do those things? Where is my agency actually happening in there? Where is the actual possibility space? Second thing that's sort of unspoken is that meaningful choice had already been defined through the rules of play. That's not really a thing that works. So we have to talk about rules of play, which is a great little book. If you ever get a chance and you care about video games, fantastic little book. There's a thing they talk about in here. Meaningful choice needs to be discernible and integrated. This is how they define it, the world of play. They're not alone in this. Again, think about all the other books we're reading and all the other books you go over. In other words, decisions have to be obvious to the player, both in setup and in outcome. And they have to feed back into the game as a thing. Here, I'm going to put up a little Matthias Schwartz image so that way people don't get all thoughtful that I'm pretending I'm Matt. I am not. Boop, boop. 1 second.
I've had a kind of sort of similar discussion with somebody who was an aspiring video game developer. I don't remember much of the details. It was a few years ago, but I remember kind of the bits and pieces that were overlapping their thought process, which kind of opened my eyes to video game development, like in a different way, because, you know, I played video games most of my life, so, you know, obviously they're a big part of it. And yeah, it's interesting just how kind of this kind of intertwines with deeper philosophical concepts and whatnot, you know.
It is very,
I enjoy it.
It's fantastic. I was very fortunate to spend a lot of time with Matthias, and go through this, and with Clint, who also spending a lot of time there. This is Matthias. Just pretend I'm coming. It's him. I'm adding things, so I'm doing that. But this is Matthias. He's lovely. He's got a wonderful blog where he goes over all this stuff he hasn't in some time because, you know, he's busy and everyone's busy working. You know, it's life. But
Fair.
That's Matthias. Matthias is great.
Awesome.
So, to continue, the decisions have to be obvious to the player in setup and outcome. You have to have discernible and integrated realities. They have to feed back into the game itself, and it has to be knowable to everybody, right? So he likes it, as he says so much, he's been using it as a razor for anything. What is the skill check or the meaningful choice for everything that's happening in there? There's a problem. The problem is the third. And this is where you start getting into a lot of issues. I thought the rules of play of meaningful choice was widely shared. It is not. So when you go into what meaningful means, and this is kind of core to why I went way down this road of like, how do we even define meaning? How is meaning generated? How do we make sense of things? Oh, look, I found a guy. We end up defining different things. We talk about psychology, how meaningful play works. So it's chemical reactions, maybe biologically, or in video games, it's because of points. There's a lot of ways you can talk about it, but they're not useful and they're not shared. They can't cross over. They're not a thing that's valuable to sort of discuss as a thing. So this is useless as a thing. It just is. Sid Meier had a great line. A game is a series of interesting decisions, but it's not really actionable either. Interesting and meaningful. Are they the same? So this game is a series of meaningful decisions. It's tough as a thing. So he's coming back to the talk, and here's how we do systemic talks, and here's what he's doing. Why is it that Doom and Dead Space 2 are made from the same cloth? This is what he wants to go back to, this original point, this map from back. He wanted to go back and point out, and this is what we're doing. He made Doom levels. He talks about Doom combat and how choice works, and he talks about how people learn to make decisions. This is the set of slides I want to talk on. Nature creates strict boundaries, Matthias says, as to when and why organisms make decisions. Understanding those boundaries is illuminating. There's a reason why nature is a hard ass at all. Brains for people and in the world are expensive. It's lost on us because we have McDonald's everywhere that allows us to get food, and we can generally find food. A lot of us are able to, luckily. And our brain consumes a silly amount of our energy for being this tiny little thing that it is. In the rest of the world, in nature, food is a scarce thing. Having a big brain to make decisions is a luxury that comes down the road, because we can't even assume that a large brain comes with benefits. That's not really a thing. It's just a happenstance. There are cool evolution experiments that have been done artificially that show that being smarter doesn't actually make you more fit for survival. And we can I think that teases out pretty logically. So they used examples of smart and dumb fruit flies that mixed together. The smart ones died out while the dumb ones survived. This is how it works. The cost of having a brain is a thing, building, maintaining, and using it, and having decisions. Decisions instead of just pure reaction. This is a thing. Decisions is a thing. So we might make a mistake. Nature, the world, punishes mistakes. Mistakes are a mistake. That's why we call them mistakes. Like mistakes in nature, though, might mean you die. The nature is going to protect animals from making decisions. That's how it works. This was how they're set up. So behavioral ecology is a study about why animals make the decisions when they do. The rule is this: animals learn in one situation, but they don't learn in two. Get it? Animals don't learn when a pattern is so simple that an innate strategy to deal with the situation is possible. In that case, evolution more or less hard codes a reaction to a thing via innate behavior, reactions to colors and things and like that. This is a very cheap brain, and evolution patterns towards that. Animals also don't learn when the situation is too complex. A strategy is impossible to discern because patterns inherent to the situation are also indiscernible. You can't find or think through what the patterns are. So take, for example, an animal living on a forest floor. They won't be able to understand what the next meal is going to pop up. They're not thinking about that. It could be anywhere in this image. They don't give a shit. The animal doesn't care. It's the most effective way of making a decision is to simply search randomly, react to the world. Again, this results in cheaper brain. Nature basically resorts to, as he calls it, button mashing. So to be clear, it doesn't mean the pattern's not there or that there isn't a pattern. It means the habitat of the animal, its particular lifestyle, what it does throughout the day, the week, the month, or the years that it's alive, not the 70 or 80 years quite often, doesn't make it possible or even worthwhile for a species that makes decisions. Between those is a sweet spot. There's an environment that's so variable and complex that we never develop an innate strategy, but where patterns are discernible enough to learn and make decisions. Between those two. Now, in nature, this happens when your own best strategy is not your children's best strategy. This is also counterintuitive. Generally, we might say that the more unpredictable but discernible the environment of a species is, the more decision-making can occur. So the generational shift that's happening here is a big deal. This is experience, emergent behavior, agency. Decision is valuable there. Decisions aren't valuable in the other two. There's no value there. There's no affirming reason for it. There's no drive. But in that middle space, there is. And so he's talking about GDC. Real life is the reason we play games. The real world is chaotic, it seems. Navigating is uncertainty. It emotionally taxes us. Real life is not so complex that we might as well just act randomly. But if there's an innate strategy to deal with it beyond drinking, nobody's told me yet. It's games industry joke. Accurate too. So the real world is closer to somewhere on the right. Well, games are about building that sweet spot. This unpredictable yet highly discernible environment rich in immediate feedback. Achieving mastery over its environment is immensely pleasurable to us. We find patterns, we develop them, but there aren't really patterns. If you take a look actually and you break down what he's got there isn't really a pattern, not in that sense, not in that way. You can find one, but then there's not in another way. It becomes a thing that you find over time. And this is kind of why choice and agency is a thing. Because choice matters to nature. When an environment is so complex, then an innate strategy is not possible, but patterns are still discernible and learnable. This generally happens when the best strategy changes across generations. We play games because the real world is random, whereas in games, patterns are easier to discern. Necessarily, they're designed to be learned. Feedback's easier to gain. In the end, the biologist in him believes that choice matters because the saying a mind is a terrible waste is literally true in nature. Evolution won't let you waste it. Nature doesn't develop brains for frivolous decisions. Animals make decisions when there's no other way to deal with the situation. Now, there's false equivalence across the board. We can't simply equate human brains and human decision-making to animal brains and animal decision-making. But evolutionary biology is a thing, as he says. And this is about falling into that area that nature would develop a brain for it. So when we talk about systemic agency, moving into this space of a little bit of biological essentialism, which isn't really the goal, it's about talking through how we find ways to make those moments. So we start talking about Hull's drive reduction theory. He drives through all of this. The ability for us to talk about why play and experimentation happened, I'm not going to go into Hull. It's not there. Play is a thing that's really weird for people. It's the ability for us to do things that seem pointless, silly, where we play. We play. Playing is a big thing. Playing's huge. But why do we play? Well, there's a lot of ideas. We can talk about homo ludens, which I tend to ascribe some level to. But again, what is it? Well, Deleuze would say, play is the base of it. The play of things. That's where we start. It's where children start. It's where infants start. The first thing they do is they play. They make their way through all of these things. I'm just going to keep going. Over time, we develop and learn the response of the world. We learn meaningful choice by what we see, how we see it, how we are developed to find patterns. And so when we have this ability to talk about agency, we could reframe it in terms of satisfaction. It's a fact that's not really explicitly explored in other places because it's, more a psychological thing than a video game thing. But that's kind of the setup. Games seem like they make us feel good psychologically. The medium is interactive. The only way to engage with interactivity seems to be through choice. So making decisions must lead to feeling psychologically well, but only as a result of competence, autonomy, and relatedness needs are satisfied. It builds this entire setup, and it pushes us in a place where we talk about what is systemic agency afterwards. Now, here's where I diverge from a lot of what Matthias is talking about, and this is why it's fun. This is why I like talking about the stuff that he's talking about. It's a big deal because this is breaking down stuff I think a lot of people can understand. Most of us here probably play video games. That's a thing that is fairly popular these days. The idea of someone being a gamer is boring almost on its surface, I would assume, because I think a lot of people just are. So it's like, okay, well then, so here's the question. How does Doom afford systemic agency? So Doom's at this point was 20 years old. Now it's 30 plus years old. And the way that it works is pretty simple. For you kids, let me tell you all about it. It's a 3D environment that overwhelms the senses. At the time especially, Wolfenstein was released, Ultima Underworld was sort of around, but it didn't control like Doom. Doom was new. Doom was different. It had a freedom of agency and movement as a thing. Why is it assumed boring? No, I'm saying it's boring to say that people play games. It used to be, when I was younger, 20, 30 years ago, gamers was not a thing. Everyone plays games now. That's why it's kind of like, it's rote. Everyone kind of gets the idea of games and how they work and how they play. I don't have to have the same explanations. It's kind of nice that way. But this thing that you do, the first time you touch Doom, if you're old enough to remember the first time you played a 3D game, my son's finally getting his first mouse and keyboard. He's been using controllers. Watching him navigate and figure it out is this. How do you control it? Is it keyboard, mouse, joystick? You go through all of those. As you move around, you don't know what's around a corner. You're kind of scared of monsters. You're scared of possibilities, all these things. A lot of times people stand in one place, they just shoot as the monsters come at them until they learn to move competently. But at some point you learn to move and strafe move, where you turn as you hit right or left, and you're able to go around another character and shoot them the entire time. You can dodge fireballs. After a little while, you can use strafing maneuvers to close in on enemies shooting you as you're dodging, and you start feeling really good until a little bit later, because now there's something new, the Barons of Hell. You die a few times. You realize you can circle strafe around them as well, but they're not bad, because it takes 5 full blasts from a double-barreled shotgun before they crumble to the ground. And you had to be playing Doom 2 to have that weapon. Doom 1 only had the single. That's where he starts talking about, when we made our levels for these, and I did the same thing. In high school, I was making levels for Doom. It took me forever because I didn't have a modem. Oh God, this was a different era, everybody. You couldn't download level editors. So you had to sort of figure it out on your own. You kind of had to play that way. So by the time you had an editor, you were already a pretty fucking good Doom player and you could figure it out. This thing shifted for you. This is what competence became for him. Competence defined as an intrinsic need to effectively deal with an environment. The Glued to Games book, he mentioned another point, calls it the experience of overcoming a challenge or extending our abilities in a meaningful way. To be satisfying, however, our successes need to occur in the context of real challenge. When Nietzsche talks about the will to power, this is what he's referring to. The will to overcome, the force to overcome a challenge and the enjoyment thereof. He writes about this. This is not like a small thing. It's a big deal. This is what he's talking about. That thing, competence is found in a challenge and overcoming it. This is Nietzsche. This is will to power. That's what will to power is. So fine motor skills are a necessity to aim. That's just a given. 100%. You have to also have timing to line enemies up with shots. Judgment calls that have been made so that missile weapons hit moving enemies. The rhythm and cadence of player enemy weapons firing are all elements that combine into a compelling challenge. These are skill checks that has to be learned, mastered, and ultimately internalized. In other words, the act of playing Doom at the low level can be committed to procedural memory, what we call muscle memory. After a while, we play the game effectively in our sleep. And so this is the setup. Survival skills, muscle memory, all of this is this thing that's really odd, this prevailing narrative. Doom is a good action game. Action games are fun and compelling and meaningful because they're tense and they have these skill checks. But that's the thing we have to remember, is that a skill check is not something a player does. People don't do skill checks. This is presuming that a person chose to do a skill check. Right? They don't. Skill checks are things people react to. So how do you react to a skill check? Well, you do that by making decisions. How do you make decisions? By having a space that's able to be interpreted in certain ways. And again, how you've set this up and how you put this together. Paul Rudd. Well, Paul Rudd the Ant-Man. Hello. I'm going to steal this competence connection from my own class when I teach Will to Power. This is perfect. I use this Nietzschean in my class. The higher man is distinguished from the lower by his fearlessness and his readiness to challenge misfortune. It's a credit Matthias Warch when you do. And I will post a, one sec. I'll, I will make sure I get a link to Matthias in the chat for that too, because I'm just ripping him off as I'm doing this whole thing right now.
Okay, yeah, that would be great material, because I always like to switch up how I teach things each semester. And mind you, I mentioned Nietzsche briefly for intro stuff, but still, that would be amazing. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's not a shocking URL, but it is warch.com. I'll post it up. Come on, really? That's not what I wanted to do. Come on, there we go. And we delete all that shit because I can't believe the link didn't copyright. Warch.com. He has all of this. You can watch him give these talks. He has all the slides for download. Use them and run with it. His talks are incredible, and he genuinely knows way beyond a lot of stuff. He's pretty ridiculous.
Thank you.
The other one,
Thank
I'm
you.
trying to get Clint to come on here. I want to get Matthias on here to discuss some of this, because I think there's a lot of particular lines that I know he's changed in his opinions on. But the big deal is this. The game needs these properties for competence: clarity of the goal, a challenge that's not overwhelming, clear feedback on our actions that makes us feel like we learned something. That last part, though, is what makes things meaningful at the moment-to-moment level. Because for Matthias and for Clint and for all of us, I was born out of this effectively. Video games aren't the story afterwards. That's not actually what video games are. We talk about the video games as the story afterwards, but what they are is the moment-to-moment experience. They are the thing that's happening, the process of becoming that the software is actually taking part in. Software and video games are ever only one frame and then gone, and continuously that only as that. The only way we ever understand what that frame is to put it in comparison with what it was, to what we expect it to be, and the ability for us to predict that. And that way that we exist sort of across times gives us that constant becoming that video games sort of give us a window into that we wouldn't have otherwise. And so the ability for us to be fully in control of a game is tough. Requires very good signs and feedback to all of our actions. So when he asks, what is the skill check of meaningful choice? What he's really asking is, how good are the 3 C's, character, camera, controls, and the signs and feedback implicated whenever the game expects me to react to a skill check by making a split-second decision? And that's deeply unsatisfying. I can only make split-second decisions if the 3 C's are awesome and the signs and feedback are clear and unambiguous. When that happens, you can get into a flow state. You can get into that when those things are there. The controls disappear. You become one with the game. Flow state's a real thing. There have been studies on it. Competence needs become fulfilled because the amount of immediate feedback from the game to each of my low-level actions allows me to master every skill check the game throws at me. This is a double-edged sword. This is part of my work and what I've been doing in trying to figure out a way to critique games from this very same angle, because this is something that can be abused. And we know this. I can go into it in a moment. Signs and feedback in a skill check scenario are actually the lowest level which a game creates systemic agency. The way that games enable through how the 3 C's, chemical, character, how these things are integrated with the signs and elements that are being placed in front of a person in succession, this is systemic agency, interacting with these things. This is a surprise because we normally talk about agency in terms of big decisions. You should be able to choose if you are good or evil. It's agency in a game. No, and we abuse it to say things like players have freedom. But that's not really freedom. That doesn't feel like it because there's not that thing. Nope. No. Fuck off. Fuck off. Really? Did it just jump all the way? It did jump all the way to the goddamn end. Are you fucking kidding me? Okay, come on. There we go. All right. So, the game is a series of low-level control-related decisions, as he said. So, mastering skill checks as a thing is via good 3 C's, as he says. Signs and feedback need to be good because only then competence can be fulfilled. It's an important component of systemic agency. When we talk about that, though, in Doom, Glued to Game says, it is the gradual progression of challenges as the player marches into hell that provides the strongest motivational pull of Doom in virtually all successful FPS games. The progression is key. With each hellish opponent you fell, there's a small victory won on your road to a larger goal. From a competence standpoint, these small moment-to-moment victories are like a trail of chocolates, each providing a small bite of satisfaction as the player succeeds and progresses to a larger victory, gaining skills moving in those positions. But is that all? It's a very cynical, odd way of looking at it. Is fulfillments of competent needs the only thing a good game and action game needs? Sure, the authors don't mean to say this, but taken at face value, it sounds like they're saying that being able to point a gun at somebody and overcoming a progression of challenges is all that you have to do. I kind of agree with this. I agree that Doom's rational level design. He was a systems designer on Star Wars 1313 at Lucas. We commonly call this the game system story. This is Star Wars 1313 because that's the only picture of the game system story he has. This is important. But having played as much Doom as I have in my lifetime, I think we seriously miss the mark when we identify competence needs as the main reason why Doom's gameplay is good. How many modern games do you know that have good aiming, controls, signs and feedback, and an enemy progression that advances the difficulty level appropriately throughout the game, but which aren't that much fun to play because they're missing a spark? I know that feeling quite a bit. I know a lot of games that nail that progression. And I only have to look one game further down the Doom franchise, Doom 3, to know that a competent execution of a progression of challenges is not enough to create the kind of gameplay that Doom 1 and 2 had. There's a danger to thinking about action games in terms of competence, but it's a trap games fall into. And that's why analyzing Doom 1 and 2 is such a big deal. It's a reminder that Doom doesn't frame its core component, its systemic agency, in terms of only competence. There's something else to Doom. Something that satisfies autonomy as a need. You ready for it? Doom works because it has orthogonal unit differentiation. I fucking love Matthias.
Exactly.
You need to understand with Matthias, like, this is the world of video game theory. There's not a lot of people in it. Like, Ian Bogost does his shit, but it's because it fits in with his oriented ontology shit. I don't find his stuff compelling at all. Actual people playing in the world of theory, like how games find meaning and how they work, Matthias and Clint were like literally forever ahead. And it's a deep sadness that they haven't been forced to like every year churn out more of these because I demand more theory from them. But this idea for Matthias is the center of it. Orthogonal unit differentiation. He's going to call it OOD. I'm not. I'm going to call it differentiation. I'm going to call it difference. Harvey Smith introduced this 11 years before this at a GDC. It gives us a way to talk about how game systems are meaningfully differentiated in their abilities and behaviors, and how that distinction leads to interesting and complex gameplay. It leads to what Matthias has called an expressive possibility space. It's a fucking good concept in video games. But once again, it's a bit inconcrete. It's a bit ephemeral. So let's take it from the top. Establish a better representation of possibility space. Here is something you figure out after playing Doom a long time. The enemies and weapons in the game are finely tuned to interact across multiple axes. What at first seems visceral, barely controllable, and simplistic fights for survival is actually a very complex interplay of many gameplay elements that allow for ever new tactics and strategies. This happens via this differentiation. Look at the enemy classes in Doom. You can map every type to a couple distinct categories. On one axis, we have hit scan enemies versus those that shoot projectiles. You can map these out very, very easy. Projectile, hit scan. If you don't know, projectile means they actually have a projectile that travels in time and space and slowly makes its way. Hit scan is where it's based on fire hit, the hit scan. It's an instantaneous traversal of a bullet. All units can map this out, and you can then map out by how much damage they deal for each one of these things. On another axis, we have enemies that charge versus enemies that sort of stay back, which is a function of speed and behavior overall, but this setup can be put there. Put them together, and you can create a chart that looks like this. And that chart is an accurate representation of the possibility space of doom for specific enemies. You'll notice the distribution of enemies of these few units covers the entire spectrum. That allows the player to have a specific opinion on each enemy type, prioritizing them, making decisions meaningfully in that. For example, which enemy in this situation should you take out first with your shotgun? I'd assume it's the Black Sergeant. He has a hit scan weapon that can deal immediate damage, but you can dodge fireballs quite easily. The reason why Doom combat works well is that each enemy represents a distinct, consistent, discernible behavior that can be learned. Because at the base level, there are only two traits to enemies. They fall across two axes. Seeing how important understanding and learning this is, we should look at how we actually process and store it. It happens via schema. You're going to see why I love this talk. Which is, quote, an organized pattern of thought or behavior that organizes categories of informations and the relationships among them. We do this via a schema, a structure. New information is either assimilated or accommodated. Assimilated means that it's integrated into that structure. Accommodated means that the information is different. It doesn't fit. A new schema must be constructed instead. Anyone want to join in the AO reading and understand what I'm talking about? You should already. Axiomatics and set theory. This is tying into that directly. The way that capital functions and is able to build rules, and if it does it, it'll build a new rule. If it doesn't fit an old one, it'll find a way to do a new one. This is the nature of axiomatics and the space of capitalist representation and imagery and how it functions. That's what he's breaking down here. But again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. When we talk about schemas, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, does this potentially relate in some small way about like false choice? Like Pokemon Leaf Green is a great example of this, where the player can often have false choices that lead to the same conclusion. And oftentimes we can see capitalism making these like false equivalences in the sense of, I mean, this might be a weird example, but it's like, oh, you have the freedom to work wherever you want. But at the same time, it's like, do you really? Because at the end of the day, if you have to work, is that really a freedom to work? So kind of how game design can present false choices, could that be analogous to how capitalism can do the same sort of thing?
Of course, think about it slightly differently, because it's one of the things Matthias hit on earlier. It's that after the fact, we talk about satisfaction. Satisfaction doesn't appear during, it's after the fact. And in fact, we talk about the entirety of the act rather than the minute-to-minute thing. The minute-to-minute thing is what the drives are able to attach to. That's the continuous process of becoming that a video game is. Afterwards, we totalize it when we look back on it and we say, oh, this part was satisfying because of this. We're claiming that. But that's not actually how it works. This is not how we find things meaningful. This isn't how things work even for us. But how does one choose what they're choosing? How does one make the choices? Because it's what's made available. It's agency within one's power that matters. And so when you tell someone, oh, you have the power to do anything, they test that. And when they don't, it feels honestly castrating. And that's kind of the world we live in specifically. I know our Nietzsche reading group is going. My plan is to go right up to the 9 o'clock and then jump off so that way we can you can flood right in, Lilia. For those who don't know, I will post the Discord link again, discord.gg/DGQC. Head on in if you want to join our reading of Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols is tonight, I think. Is that tonight, Lilia? I think it is.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
We're at the end of the Maxims and Arrows. It starts in 30 minutes, right after this stream. And then afterwards, I may come back on for like a bullshitting fucking around stream. But that's the plan right now. But I like how he talks about this. When we talk about schemas, we're talking about structures that are presumed and built inside of the game. These are affirming structures. These are things that are designed and built particularly. These are chosen. There's nothing accidental in a game. Everything's programmed. You might accidentally have an emergent reaction or interaction, but there's not like the Doom guys don't suddenly shift how they behave. It's coded, it's built, it's set up. And so we have a really odd setup when we're talking about structures in a game that are affirmatively built that people are interacting with ongoing. And so with this, we can actually talk within schemas, within the sets of these structures, we can talk about the information they store. We call schema a frame when it contains properties and behaviors of an object or situation. We call it a script when it encodes steps and processes that describe the approach to a situation or an object. Frame or script, this is, I think, useful language. Again, it's a little sort of insider baseball, but it's important. So for Doom, the attributes of an enemy type would be its frame, while the player's tactics for dealing with it would be the script. Players can create frames and script for every type in Doom. You can set this up. This is how we sort of build our gameplay inside of this closed world and find ourselves finding agency. They know exactly what each enemy type represents and how best to deal with it. Because in Doom, everything is clearly delineated through differentiation. So far, so good. All individual units, clear and concise properties and behaviors, which creates discernible patterns. Each pattern, encountered on its own, is a no-brainer. But put them all over each other and hell breaks loose. This initial situation, is the shotgunner first? Well, the script, what can we do to reliably follow it? Do you deal with hit scan guys first? Is that the rule? Sure, but that's fine. But actually that imp is like right there. Maybe we can't move fast enough to get out of his way. The contextual immediate interaction that Matthias is talking about here, this is the judgment call, the choice. How I prioritize the situation becomes tricky. There are options. There isn't a best case scenario immediately. This prioritization choice happens because I now have an opinion on how I can deal with this, how I can encounter this, and how I can move. This is the complex interplay of systems that are easily understood individually, but combine into situations that do not have consistent and superior tactics. Important in game theory when you talk about designing games, kind of, again, you can see the knock-on as we sort of play with these things. Overall, it's defined. It has a schema. There's a quality to Doom combat I can learn and internalize. About prioritizing enemies, strafing around, lining up enemies in specific lines, picking up the right weapon for the right job. But I can never create a script that works for all Doom combat encounters equally. That's because the combination of multiple, orthogonally differentiated enemies creates situations in which an obviously superior tactic simply does not exist. I play Dota 2 for a reason. There are effectively too many combinations of heroes to ever play the same game really twice, let alone the options of each hero, let alone the items for each hero, the order of building for each hero, and how every hero can be played anywhere on the map contextually. There is no right way to play any single moment in Dota. After the fact, we can say what would have worked better with perfect knowledge, but there's no right way to make any single move. You have to work with decision-making and the prioritization choice. And this is cool, because we've created something familiar. We've created this, an environment where patterns are discernible, but combine into a non-trivial whole. These non-trivial situations cannot be learned because they change across generations, at least if you imagine each combat encounter as a new generation. An innate strategy is simply not possible. We can't go on autopilot as we consider each of Doom's combat encounters. You must stay engaged. Always keep learning. You can think about, again, these things and setting up these lines. If you do it like this, you end up in this odd place where the patterns are discernible, but they become harder to make out individually. These overlays, you can find points of attack by looking at it. But of course, the combat fluid's far more fluid and dynamic than that. The player interacts with the encounter by moving around and selecting weapons. The patterns rearrange themselves. As you do, suddenly these things aren't in the same place and they're moving at different speeds and playing. And again, they do it again, parallaxing against each other. You can't recognize the pattern. The player has agency over how these patterns rearrange. This is what's happening when someone's playing Doom. They're rearranging this pattern. placing themselves in differentiating situations in different ways, like a DJ scrubbing waves to find new points of attack. It's a metaphor, sure, but if you play Doom, you know what he's talking about. If you remember these systems, you're moving all of these over each other. This is what we're doing. Enemy infighting. This can happen. For example, players can get enemies to shoot each other and other allies in the back by lining them up, triggering a firefight between monsters. Player gets free kills and can concentrate on other parts of the level. There's also weapon differentiation, which is a huge deal. Specific weapons work better against some than others. The distance the enemy is at matters for all of this. As a result, players regularly switch weapons to optimize the experience. And then there's the reality of pain, where select monsters could be kept from ever shooting the player if they were needled with bullets. For example, the chance of wincing in pain instead of firing, was 90%. So when playing Doom, you would position yourself so that the Cacodemon occluded hit scanners on the opposite side. He'd be a living shield that would be riddled with bullets from both sides, constantly in pain and not able to shoot. He can go on forever, as he says, but it does all this because it affords specifically prioritization choice, which means that for all Doom encounters, prioritization of enemies is possible. There are multiple ways to do it. Choices are equally weighted so the player has options and is able to have an opinion on each combat encounter, and as a result, no clearly superior script for all of Doom can ever be developed. It's accurate. I should also point out, prioritization choice is not a free-for-all of trivial choices. The number of choices of how to approach combat must be small and meaningfully differentiated. There's one more thing that prioritization choice is not, but he'll get to that in a bit. And now he talks about meaningful all of this. It's the last bit, I promise, and we're going to get moving. The big deal for this is that it satisfies autonomy needs. Autonomy is not freedom. It's not that. It's about choice and opportunity. It's our innate desire to take actions out of personal volition, not because we're controlled by others. Its autonomy is that it comes from whatever us is. That feeling that it's not being pushed into place. It's not as simple as feeling like I made a choice on my own. That's not really what it is. It's far more complicated than that. It's actually one of the more powerful psychological needs, but it's not simple. We just don't like being controlled, but what that means is far more complicated than just, I made a choice. So that last thing, what is choice not? It's not a way to force priority. Autonomy is a weird thing. This is what as he writes, just like its fulfillment can vastly improve enjoyment of an activity, stomping on it damages motivation. There's research on this, focused on the subject of how people internalize an extrinsic motivation, like games and game achievements, cynical choices that a person is doing. But as game players, we can identify with the sentiment without deeper exploration of that research. We don't like being controlled by circumstance or by others. That's it. By that controlling force in the case of an overly scripted enemy spawning, in which wave after wave of enemies arrives in the same exact way. Checkpoint restart after checkpoint restart. Or an overly authoritative game designer who reveals his existence by enforcing his will when he takes control of the player, jerking them around, forcing them to make choices and do things. It's a grain of salt here. The enemy combat behavior should not force the player's hand. That's not really a rule. It's just a statement. We can use attention grammars like charging enemies, for example, to spice up encounters. But you can't spoon feed every single enemy via authoritative scripting. In that case, we start stomping on autonomy, the player, their desire pathways. We take away choice and opportunity of how someone can engage with the encounter. And so, prioritization choice creates an environment that matches that sweet spot. We'll get to my critique of all this, and it's a very specific one. By adding a layer of interesting decisions to the game, in the case, high-level enemy-related decisions, learning and acting on what we learned becomes fun. We learn like kids. It's a constructivist approach. The amount of information there is to learn about combat is diverse, so we're constantly assimilating and accommodating new information and updating mental models and structures. Prioritization choice is the second ingredient as he goes through, and it's the reason why doing away with the other two allows something with systemic agency alone to be fantastic in and of itself. And that is how he explains systemic agency comprehensively. And I love this talk about games. But I want to talk about this slide specifically, because this is where I think an auto-critique is worthwhile. After all this, I promise this is the whole point of why I brought it up. But again, it's also a really fun talk, and Matthias is wonderful. For Matthias and this talk, and the way we've talked about it this whole time, is we're talking about video games. Video games are an authored space in which people are building the way that this is showing up, this pattern that you're seeing. What is on screen is chosen by developers and designers, whether intentionally or not, but it's all placed. The world you're in is not that. Nothing is placed here. No one put shit around you. No one built things. Even if you have a house, no one put things in the order to make the world knowable. That's not how the world has ever worked. The world is the chaos. It is the chaos, necessarily. The existence and material conditions that things have, it isn't that the world shifts from being the big checkerboard pattern. Let's go all the way to the beginning, just because it's just easier that way. We'll go all the way back to my favorite slide. I wrote him years ago. He gave me permission to steal this slide, and I used it a bunch in like a bunch of presentations with sources. Don't worry, I always source Matthias, because it's this slide right here that I find the critique appearing. When we talk about insects and reactive animals, something that's that simple, is their existence because the world is that simple? Or is it that their existence is that simple to enable that response? That a response in a reactive thing, in the material conditions of how that creature is born and lives and everything, that's all they have to do. That's very simple. From their position, they're looking for X, Y, and Z. It's basic. Is there not a too complex for them? I would assume the world is incredibly complex for all these reactive animals. So how is it that they're able to, in the same exact space, the exact same chaos, the exact same complexity that we live in, that everything exists in, that CT machines and radio waves and all the complex ways we have of looking, all of the chaos that we know we're in, these three things apply to the real world. We can absolutely see them. I can look around me and I can see a world that's just complex enough. I can look at a chessboard and see that it's not. I can see things that are very simple, things that are very complex, things that seem too complex. How does that happen? We are built into this. The material conditions of humanity are not something that we are simply born into without existing. We exist politically and historically and socially first. As we're born into the chaos of it all. But very quickly, the edges of everything are taught to us by family and society. We learn by the world that is built for us. We are learning what the sweet spot is by being told what is recognizable as patterns and what is not. We are taught this and we learn this. It is not even a conscious thing. It is an acceptance we have as we work through all of these elements. We simplify. Mathematicians, physicists, those who work inside of all of that, their job for measurements and functions is to turn the complex into the thing that is simple. That doesn't look too simple to us because it's an incredibly complicated fucking crazy ass fucking formula with weird ass graphs and all that shit. But it is more simple and it is knowable. And it's actually a very, very simple pattern for the chaos. That is what science does. They see the chaos, the too complex, and they find a way to measure it. They find ways to take slices and measure it objectively in all of these slices. But they're not pretending to know the chaos. They're knowing the abstraction, the functions. That's what they play with. This is how we know things. This is how we recognize it. It's not that we have a love of that sweet spot. It's that we build the sweet spot as we exist. Because the world is complex. Always. But somehow, as Matthias talked about in the talk, we are able to build a schema of patterns that is putting us in that sweet spot always. It's always too complex. If we make something that's too simple, it doesn't allow us to have that complexity. And we bounce back and forth as we create and play with symbols and we work socially and we work with others. We can't use a word that's too simple. I love you guys. What does that mean? That's too simple. It's got to be more than that. There's got to be something else going on. Brooks is talking about other words he's discussing. Well, it's not too we build all of this. We assemble the chaos from all of the little pixels on the right into the pixels on the left and middle. And that middle part is us making sense of it. This is what we build. So when we're playing a video game, it's satisfying primarily because we're playing the thing that was built by other people who were built like this. And it is necessarily in and of its own thing. Try going and playing a video game like 5D chess or the 4D toys. Both of these are games that utilize something that you will never have experienced before. It is unnerving. It's complex. It is too chaotic. And it's very difficult to figure out and build a systemic understanding of how four-dimensional mathematics reveals itself inside of a 3D space. It's not the middle. It's not the left. It is the right. But you can do it enough. You can play it enough. You actually can turn it into the middle. And it wasn't at first. And suddenly people who are masters at 5D chess or 4D toys or 4D golf, 4D golf's a fantastic one. Any of these, they'll become masters at it and they will realize what I'm talking about. They built that thing where they're able to make sense and understand of that. They know what to ignore. You didn't know what to ignore before. The image on the right is too complex because you're taking it all in, because you don't know what to ignore and what not to. We learn what to ignore through the connective, disjunctive, conjunctive syntheses as things process, as all of this builds. We build this, not through contemplation. It is passive syntheses that build us. It is not a known process. We don't do this. It is done to us, by the multiplicity that is our existence and all the nerves and all the endings and all the parts of us that are firing off. Even now, we don't even know it because you know what to ignore. We know what to put out of our minds. This middle ground is a sweet spot that we uniquely get to have because we have consistency over time. That's a thing that a lot of creatures don't have. The ability for us to recognize those deeper grooves that happen over and over. We will see a cloud. We will see a forest floor. And we see it once. That's not any use to us. It stays as chaos. But we see it 1,000 times. You might notice. You'll notice 10 times. You'll notice when a leaf is in the wrong place. You'll notice when something's moved, something's been through there. Do it 1,000 times and you know what to ignore. And actually you may not even know what you're ignoring. The way that your awareness is built is affirmed through these processes and you're not even aware of it until it's too late, until you fall back on your own processes and claim it all for yourself. This is great. There is 5D time travel diplomacy. I want to play and I cannot wait. It's a downloadable. I'm getting my hands on it this weekend. I'm very excited to play. I love these things where it's like it breaks you because it's not that these games, and again, I'll tell you, 5D chess is not hard. It's the load of shit. Chess is hard. Do you want to go tell my son that chess isn't hard? He's learning to play chess. Go tell him that. And he will go, oh, and he'll feel like an asshole. Because none of this is hard. All of it's hard. And none of it's hard. It's all learning the patterns and doing it over and over and learning what to ignore and what not. Chess as a thing. And Bobby Fischer's critique of chess, which I approve of, by the way, it's the reason I don't like chess, is because it's primarily a memorization game of openings and endings. And Bobby Fischer was right when he shit on all that. And I think it's a fantastic critique. That thing that chess does is, we kind of know all to do. You know what pieces to not care about. If I make a move because I'm a moron and I do a thing, you're like, that is stupid ass. Because that's the pattern you've developed and your understanding. This is how all this stuff works. This is why AI can defeat chess players, because the possibility space is that simple. In Go, this is why it doesn't work in Go the same way. If you don't know the story, AI created Go that defeated the masters of Go. But the masters of Go, they were kind of like on the left. They knew how Go was supposed to be played. And they would play like that. They didn't know what they weren't missing because they had learned the patterns. They built the patterns in themselves without knowing it. In their actions, in their repetition, they'd made the record grooves of every game deeper and deeper till they couldn't get out of them. And what happened is AI beat the shit out of them because those patterns, that's what AI can do. That's all it can do. And then some dude who's like a mid-level, like still rock star, beating the shit out of me, no problem. But like not a master at all. He did stuff that like literally any human would know he was doing. He started building in one corner at the same time, and the AI ignored him because the pattern, it only does that. It doesn't know new. That thing defeated it. He beat the shit out of it with a boring, crappy strategy, because these games, when you enable that right side and you understand that it's that right side, that it's the too complex, this side for you, this one, too complex, right here, too complex, right here. We all start here, we make it here where Matthias's head is. That's the sweet spot. When things get too simple, we may not even recognize we're there. But we build this. We turn the chaos into these things. This is the logic of sense. This is how we make sense. With that, I am going to stop right now because we have a reading of Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols, led by our lovely Lilia. Thank you very much, by the way, for coming in and running one of these. I know we have two. I think, is this the one for the Friday night? And then we have another, like, that Westerners aren't part of. Like, I don't know how else to phrase it. Like, it's the Aussie and the...
This is for the weirdo Australians.
Yeah, this is the Aussie reading. The Aussie. I've seen Crocodile Dundee.
Aussie!
I've seen Crocodile Dundee.
If you really want to milk it, you just got to come through with a "come on, you cunt."
Yeah, that's it's hard to tell if you're Australian or Scottish when you say that, though. It's all about how you say cunt.
Actually,
that's the tough part, because it's the Scottish are cunt, where like there's a throaty thing in there. The Aussie's just cunt, like it's like yeah when you say it. So it's a different setup. It's the opposite sides of the world. It's different thing. But speaking of cunts, we'll get to Nietzsche and off we go. So thank all of you for joining. If you support and like the stream and you want to be part of the QC, please do join the Discord, discord.gg/DGQC. Of course, if you want to support, super chats are always fucking welcome. Memberships are great. All that stuff's happy. Do subscribe, give a like. All that shit helps the channel. But if you want to really, really help, the Patreon helps a lot. Even if it's $1, $2, you wouldn't be surprised at how amazing that stuff helps. We're trying to keep building. Next week, and at this time slot, is going to be plastic pills, and it is going to be overnight, and I'm going to be drunk by the end of it, and it's going to involve a lot of swearing and probably slurs, and I'm probably going to get canceled for it. By the end of it, I'll be so enraged. But that's okay. Thank all of you. Thank you for joining.